Hey, what's up, comrades? We're back. Season 3 of Highlander, and it starts off with a real fucking banger. So we start off the episode 1 with this girl having sex with this guy. They're Japanese, right? And then she gets a call from her husband, who's this Gaijin guy, and he's like, oh, hey, I had to return to do this thing or whatever. And so she's like, you gotta get the fuck out of here, lover, right now. And so he skirts off, but the husband with his goons are just waiting for him. So they grab him up, and then they cut off his head. He's not immortal or nothing like that, but Midori, who's the lady, she sees this whole situation, goes inside, he comes up, confronts her about the whole situation, and then is like, make love to me, wife. And she's like, okay. So he starts like fucking her, and then she stabs him, and she's like, oh. A bit later, we get Charlie. He's just working out in the gym. Remember Charlie? Oh yeah, that's right. He's working out at the gym in New York, and guess who shows up? Duncan. He's back. So we're starting the new arc. I know we're gonna call it yet, but they jibber jabber a little bit. Charlie's doing great. He's back to like almost full health from like getting shot and stuff, running this gym, doing a great job. It's been over 6 months since Duncan left. And then he's like, oh, hey, by the way, there's someone here looking for you. I don't know how they know you're back here, but they were waiting over there. And then Duncan sees her and he like flashes back to this Japanese woman, like obviously from his past, and goes up and talks to her, and she hands him like this little telescope or spyglass or whatever. It's a spyglass. And then he recalls that he was like dead lying in the water on this beach, and that this knight was coming up to like check him out or whatever. And then this old Japanese dude like rolls up with the katana and he fights off some guys, and then Duncan like wakes up because he's immortal, so he can't die. And then he starts fighting, and they have like a fight, and then this guy ends up taking him back to his like shrine or his dojo or whatever, and just like training him on how to fight with a katana and stuff. And we find out pretty quickly this is an origin story, not for Duncan, but for his sword. He's been fighting with this sword like for 2 whole fucking seasons, right? This like fancy fucking Japanese sword. And we find out this is where he got it from. And so it's this guy, and he's got other kids and like wife supposedly, but there's like one main lady that's like his daughter who hates Duncan and doesn't explain why. And at some point they're just like training, and then they're talking. The old man tells him that like, oh hey, you're a barbarian, it's a barbarian this, but like jovially, like he makes fun of him. He's like, oh, you Gaijin sure love laying on the ground. Should I get you a pillow? Because they're like, he's teaching him how to like martial arts and stuff. And so at some point he notices like there's some dudes coming from like the Emperor, and he explains that like, oh hey, Gaijin are supposed to be killed, like they're not supposed to be here at all. And so if the Emperor finds out, like, that's a big deal. So he goes off to like speak with the Emperor's men, and the past Midori, I think it's played by the same actress, but the daughter of the guy is like, your very presence has killed my father. He's going to take his life. And the guy Duncan is like, what? So he goes and asks him about it. He's like, oh yes, I have done something dishonorable, and I have to honor my family by killing myself. And then he's like, no, just kill me instead. Like, I'm immortal, I can't die, so it's not a big deal. And the guy's like, I will not dishonor with lies. I will not commit honor to my family with lies. And I'm like, balls. Baller is based as shit. And so there's a lot. This episode is a lot with like honor and honoring this and honoring that, because Duncan swears. The guy asked Duncan to be his like second, and so when you're committing seppuku, you like stab yourself in the stomach, and then your homie like cuts off your head, and just to make sure that you don't try to back out at the last second or whatever, to keep your honor. So that's great. And so Duncan swears that he'll protect this guy's family for like all generations of time, because he reveals that he's an immortal and whatnot, and that's how we get to Midori in the present, and him protecting her. So she goes to see him. She needs protection because her husband's like a Yakuza boss or something, has all these like things, and he's like sketchy as fuck, but he's dead or whatever. So then we end up going, he's like, oh, Charlie, I'm gonna go to Japan and take care of some stuff. And then he doesn't, because I guess this whole incident with her cheating on her husband like happened here in New York, right? Which is why she's here, not in Japan, which makes sense. But anyway, they go to the hospital where the husband supposedly is like dead, so she can like identify the body or something. And then he's alive. Oh no! That's because he's he's an immortal. What? And so Duncan and him like chitter chatter for a little bit, and then he takes Midori out of there, and she explains like everything about her cheating and how she like had to marry this guy to get money to protect like the family shrine and all this stuff. Anyway, so Duncan's like, I'm going to talk to him. So he does. Meanwhile, the guy senses Duncan there, and he sends his goons to go get Midori back, who end up going and fighting Charlie. And since Charlie is like a boxer and like an ex-Navy SEAL, like all this shit, and even though he's been shot, he beats the shit out of him. But anyway, Duncan and him have a conversation about honor, about Duncan's like, you should just leave her. Like, I have to protect this family. I don't want to have to kill you, but I will if I have to, because honor this and honor that. Guy's like, well, I have to honor because she's my wife, so I'm not going to just shame myself by allowing her to leave or whatever. And they're like, okay, well, we'll see. So he goes back sees Charlie fighting those guys, just kind of laughs with him about it. Midori ends up like sneaking back to her husband because she wants, and she leaves the spyglass because she wants to release Duncan from like the vow, but she can't do that, right? Because she's a woman or something. Anyway, so Duncan's like, hell no. So he's like, all right, Charlie, now I'm going to Japan. He's like, are you going for real this time? And he's like, shut the fuck up, Duncan. Charlie. So he does. He goes and he meets up with Midori at like the family shrine, and she's like praying to what's this fuck? It's like Nakano or something. And then the husband shows up, and him and Duncan like have a conversation about like, well, this is just how it's gonna have to be. And she's like, no, not for me, please. And they're both like, shut the fuck up, woman. And so then they get off holy ground because they're on the shrine right now, and then they fight, and they have a badass like fucking sword fight. And then Duncan like catches, he loses, his sword gets stuck in the stone work on like this beach by the shrine, but then he catches the other guy's sword in like the palm of his hand, like he slaps his hands together and catches the sword, and then rips it out of his hands, and then kills him with like his own sword. It's fucking badass. And we wrap up the episode with him hanging out with Midori while they like pray to her ancestors or whatever, and then he's like, something, you know, I'm still bound by your family, and it's always going to be that way, and there's nothing that's going to change that. And then they hug it out, which ends episode 1. Moving on, we get the return of Charlie. Oh, Charlie was in the last episode. And also Richie. Richie comes back. Yay. And Richie is out doing stuff, and some lady walks up to him, and it's Donna. You remember Donna, don't you? I don't know if she was in the show before. I think she was, because they have a whole conversation about Joey, her boyfriend, or whatnot. So I vaguely kind of remember that from the first season. Anyway, it's been 18 months, and da-da-da-da, she's got an 18-month-old son. And Joey's gone. And Richie's like, oh, that sucks that the guy ran out on his son and all that stuff. And she's like, it's not Joey's not the father. You are. Dun, dun, dun. And Richie's like, what? So he goes to tell Duncan about it, and Charlie's like super excited. He's like, oh yeah, son, that's awesome, bro. That's so cool and stuff. And Duncan's just like working out, and he's like, he laughs, and he's like, all right, whatever. And then later on, Richie takes him aside. He's like, hey man, why are you not happy about this or whatever? And he's like, immortals can't have kids. And he's like, no, this was like before I became immortal. And then Duncan's like, taps his nose, and is like, hey, bro, immortals can't have sons. Just because you didn't know you were an immortal when you were before doesn't mean you weren't an immortal. You just woke up and realized like, oh crap, I'm an immortal. Right? And immortals can never have sons. And he's like, even before they become immortal? And it's like, bro, you're always an immortal, son. That's how this works. And so then Richie and him get into like a fight about that, and then Richie goes and like moves in with Donna and is like helping to like raise this kid and stuff. And then him and Duncan kind of get at odds with each other about like what's going on. And we learn why, because Duncan was like this bad guy of the show calls him a squaw lover. And then he said, hold on. Sorry, my son's playing with some Paw Patrol thing he's clicking on. He needs some help figuring out what started with R, which is the Rumble. I think that's his name. He's one of the Paw Patrol guys. Anyway, back to Highlander. So, so then Duncan is a squaw lover, and if you're not familiar with old-timey racismus, squaw is a negative term for like an Indian woman that like a white man's banging out, right? And he is. He's got this like hot Indian wife, right, which is totally my style. And not like the dot Indian, like the Indian who got decimated by plagues in America before the white man showed up. So, and he's also like adopted a friend of his as his own son, and so he's got this great life. He's got this girlfriend that he's in love with, and she wants to have a bunch of kids, and he's like, oh, we'll see about that. And then he's got this like quote unquote son, and they're all having a grand old time. But then we see that this guy like shows up eventually, and he has murdered everybody in the village because he just loves to kill people because he's that kind of psychopath. And then Duncan tries to fight him, but the guy like runs off, and then now he's back in the modern day and he wants to kill Duncan again. So he's like riding around on a motorcycle, getting in fights with people and stuff, and killing just random people. Anyway, he gets his eyes on Richie because, you know, he's associated with Duncan. And then he figures out that Richie has like a girlfriend and like a son, and she's like all ready to like move in, buy a house, be a family and all this stuff. And the whole thing is like super sketch. Like I'm immediately like, this is like ridiculous. Like if you're alive in like 2020 to like 2025, you know, there's like this whole movement online with like dudes, or not even online, just like in life, with dudes being like checking out of the whole situation, because women do this like all the time. And it's one of those things where they talk about like, look at women nowadays, and it's like, bro, this has been going on since like the beginning of time. Like you literally had like women getting like knocked up, and then but the way it was treated back in the day was like people would just like get freaking murdered, or they'd be like, it would be like openly declared that like, this is a bastard child, you receive no like awards for this whatsoever, right? So it wasn't as like an abused situation, but like people have been abusing like cheating and like dumping like the guy they had their kid with for like a better option for like thousands of years, right? It's just dudes are kind of like waking up to it a little bit more and being kind of like, well, you know what? Screw it. I'm done. I'm tapping out. I'm just going to go get my waifu online because with the chat bots and everything and soon to be like sex robots, like things are going to be great. Will it be the downfall of civilization? No. I mean, the Mormons and the Amish and the Islam will just take over, but society will be fine. It'll move on. Anyway, so then, and Joe's back. And Joe's got a bar now. He's got like a blues club or like a jazz club where he serves drinks and he plays guitar, and he's very good at guitar. We get to that more in episode, let's see, 2, 3, 4. Wait, yeah, episode 4. Anyway, sorry, I'm a little sick still. So, okay, so then Duncan goes off about this guy, and then like Richie's like girlfriend and quote unquote son, which isn't really his son, and he starts to have a lot of doubts about all that situation. He goes to talk to Joe about it, and Joe's like, mortals cannot have kids ever, not before, not after, never. So like this kid is clearly not yours. Like if you want to, and then Duncan has a whole conversation with him as well, like later on or before this, where he's like, hey man, that's not your son, but if you want to raise him and whatever, and just kind of like try to have a family, because like it is what it is, then like go nuts. But just be aware that like you're bringing them into a whole lot of danger, and that's like, you know, the name of the episode is Line of Fire. And so you gotta be extra careful. And it happens like almost immediately afterwards where the bad guy like kidnaps the girl and the boy, or like goes to attack Richie while he's like hanging out with them, and he sends them over to the clubhouse to be guarded by Charlie. And then he like runs away from the guy and jumps in like a tomato truck or whatever. And then he runs back and tells Duncan, and Duncan's like, I'm gonna kill this motherfucker. And so then he does. And then then Richie has to like, he like breaks up with this girl and tells her, and at some point she like finds his sword and she's like, what's this? Did you steal it? And it's already like, bitch, like you're coming over here claiming that Richie is the father of his child, which we all clearly know that he's not. And then he has like a fucking sword in his house because he's a dude, like, and it's the 80s or 90s, like who gives a fuck, right? And then you're already like nagging him, like the fuck, man. Richie definitely needs to not be involved in this relationship, and he's not, and he's done. And she gets super mad that she can't like leech off him and take care, and that she won't have like this random guy to like take care of her child that she like made bad decisions with. And all right, like this takes a cunt. Like Richie dodged a heavy bullet in this one. But yeah, so Duncan kills this guy and finally gets revenge, and it's a cool battle, and even like takes some blood for some reason. He gets cut a little bit, and like he puts on like face paint in like the middle of the battle. It does like a war cry, like a Sioux war cry. That's fucking awesome. Oh, fucking dope. Anyway, then him and Richie just like chill out afterwards, and you know, things are great. Good stuff. All right, the next episode is our farewell to Charlie. Like, yep, he was here for a minute, and I guess just like, you know, when Duncan got back to Gotham City here, and he's just kind of like, oh, I'm back, and I got my clubhouse, and we're gonna switch over to like the Joe Darson arc. So like these first 3 episodes are just kind of like middling ground. You know, it's like when Fairy Tale finishes battling like Aracian Sace or whatever. They have a couple episodes that are just like fucking around doing nothing, having like random adventures or whatever. That's like what these 3 episodes are. Yeah, the first 3 episodes are. So the final one of these kind of fucking around before we get to like the Joe Dawson arc situation is that we have Charlie. Oh no, so we have this guy, and he's like a revolutionary in some random made up country, and he's kidnapped some secret police guy, and he's like yelling, and he's gonna like behead this. He shoots this guy, and he's like, "Viva la revolution!" And then there's this woman who's with him, who's also part of the revolution, but she's a little less bloodthirsty than he is. Anyway, so then we go to like the next week or whatever, and Duncan and Charlie are like going somewhere to like do something, and they see like this person's trying to get on like 60 Minutes to talk about the plight of his country, and he's trying to get American aid for like the freedom fighters to get some help with like Viva la Revolution. And then Duncan like recognizes him because he's an immortal. Oh wow. And they both like participated in like the Mexican Revolution. It seems like the Mexican Revolution against the Spanish. At some point someone says the Austrians, and I was like, this is like an alternative history, right? Like the Austrians never had anything to do with anything like in America that I can recall. Like I'm not like a big European history guy, but like or American. I could give 2 shits less about most American history, but I'm pretty sure they had nothing to do with it. Anyway, it's a great episode because we get a lot of like funny Mexican music, quote unquote, like, and then we also get to see some Hispanic babes, which is like awesome. High fives all around. Definitely need more of that. We just get a lot of like the same looking like white blondie chicks in this show, like a lot, and I'm not a big fan. So it's nice to see some not representation, but like some actual beautiful women, right? Like the squat chick in the last episode, and then this one. Anyway, she's like some doctor, or she's in like med school in like Mexico in like the 1800s, which is like complete fantasy, but sure, why not? Anyway, she's over here doing like medic stuff, so we meet her for a little bit and whatnot. She eventually gets killed as part of like the revolution. Her and Duncan have some conversations about the sacrifices made and is it worth it, and Viva la Revolution and stuff. And then the guy, I can't remember his name. Hold up, I wrote some notes. Let me pull them up. So then the guy, his name, Paul. So then Paul, who's running this thing, okay, the whole thing takes place in the Balkans too. I wrote that down as well. So anyway, he's super corrupt, and he just is all about like fighting these revolutions. He doesn't care who has to die because, you know, mortals are disposable pawns and all that stuff. And so there's a lot of back and forth with that. We go a lot of back and forth, like the Mexican Revolution and Duncan having like a change of heart, because he used to be all about like war and revolutions and stuff, and then it slowly became like more peaceful. And this guy's just been like riding that train, and they used to be friends, but then they like get in these arguments here, going back and forth. And there's like an assassination attempt on like a priest who's a member of kind of like the resistance, or just wants peace in the country from this like dictator or whatever. And he survives, and then we find out that this Paul Karras, that he set up the whole thing. What? And then at some point, Charlie has like a funny conversation with like, I don't know, this woman, or he talks about being in El Salvador when they had their revolution, which, fun fact, my wife's family was part of that revolution. Like, not her, obviously, but like her grandparent, one of her grandparents was like overthrew the government. So hilarious. Anyway, so okay. And so and we find out that Paul actually hired the assassin to kill the priest to like get things going, but the priest didn't die, and then he kills the assassin with like a sword, and then Duncan finds it and is like, it has to be you, you're doing your crazy shit still, you gotta stop. And he's like, no, I'm not gonna stop, you gotta stop being a bitch. And then back and forth, and then Charlie starts becoming like very enthralled with like not this woman and with like fighting a cause, and not, you know, because he's like SEAL and like doing bad shit for America. Now he's like, oh, I could go help, like helping the Salvadorians like overthrow their government, like made things a lot better there. And it didn't for a long time. This is back to me in real life. It didn't for a long time until they got that new president, and now living in El Salvador is like living in paradise. But anyway, back to the show. So finally, the guy who's like the dictator wants to make peace with the freedom fighters, so he shows up here in Gotham to meet with the UN and everything, and declare that he's going to make peace and not fight anymore, and that him and this guy are going to make peace. And so then Duncan's like, good, you got what you want. And the guy's like, it's not what I want. I want continuous battles forever or whatever. And so then him and Duncan finally have to like fight it out, so the guy will like stop, because he keeps killing people, and this girl keeps like figuring out like stuff, so she's like next on the hit list. And then, you know, Charlie's kind of got like an eye on her, mostly on like Viva la Revolution, or like rebuilding or whatever. Anyway, so he kills that motherfucker, and then everything goes great and the peace is going. But then Charlie's like, hey, I'm gonna go anyway, and I'm gonna help these people rebuild. I'm gonna do something in my life. Like, I like working at the gym and stuff, but I just feel like I can do more, and so I'm gonna head over there and do that. And then they like hug it out, and that is the last we see of Charlie. So good luck to him. All right, now on to like a Joe centric episode, and also includes Amanda. Hooray, Amanda's back. And so her and Duncan obviously fuck a bunch in this episode, but the main thrust of the interest of the show is that Joe Dawson's dating a girl. Wow, he's got a new girlfriend. She's an art historian or something, and so they're at like some soiree at his club or whatever, and then she heads home, and then he's gonna go meet up with her to like talk. They're gonna go fuck, but he shows up and he sees her being strangled to death, and we find out that it's this Armand Thorne guy. And Duncan knows Armand Thorne because like way back in like, I don't know, again the 1800s or something, they were out like west, and Duncan was, what was the exact situation that was going on there? He's just like moseying about, and he sees these like priests baptizing people, and he rescues them because someone was trying to steal shit from him or whatever. And then they show him where like this fort is at, so he heads over there, and there's like a trading post, and he meets another immortal. It's this guy who's just like a mountain man out doing his own thing, and he just likes to be left alone. And there's like some shenanigans about him being like cheated out of money for like beaver pelts or something. but the guy, and then Duncan like gets him the right amount of money, and the guy's like, you know how to read and write? And Duncan's like, yeah, bro, I learned when I was like 50 years old, like which is like hundreds of years ago at this point. And this guy's like a newer immortal. I guess he's only 40, and so he's like, I want to learn to read and write. And there's like a teacher in the school in the fort, but we also find out that the school is collecting a lot of money from people to like expand and help the children of the the people of the fort and whatnot. And so the guy goes and pretends that he wants to like learn how to read and stuff, and so she invites him into her home where he murders her and steals all the money. Later on, they find out she's dead, and then Duncan's like starting to put things together, and he remembers that the guy, when he first met him, was talking about the cross and how interested he was in the cross and stuff. And so this dude, like, so Duncan's like looking for him like the next day, and he's gone with the priest to like the river, and he's gone with the priest to the river to like steal the cross. So he goes and pretends he wants to get baptized, and then right as he's about to get baptized, the guy's like, oh, give me that cross, and he takes it and then he kills the guy. And then Duncan rolls up, and the guy shoots him and then like runs away like a scared little bitch. And then we find out that this Thorn guy, that he, from that point forward, he like became very like well-to-do. Like he just kept stealing like artifacts and collecting them, and then somehow making money so that he could like become like a gentleman. And he's like taking himself out of the game essentially. Like he just has like a bunch of private security constantly, so he never has to fight anybody, because they can just like shoot immortals and stuff. And then he kind of hangs out and does whatever. Anyway, so then to draw him, and then Dawson this whole time is like playing blues music and being sad, and he wants to get revenge, and they're trying to figure out who it is. And like at first they don't realize it's him, so he thinks it's just like some mortal guy, and the police can't help him. But then Duncan finally tracks him down and figures out who it is, because they go to like some museum somewhere when Amanda like shows up. And they find out, they're like, oh shit, it's that same guy. And so then Duncan goes to like talk to him and is like, hey man, that's fucked up what you did, like you know, blah blah blah. The guy's like, you cannot touch me, there's nothing you can do about it, you can't get revenge or nothing, like go fuck yourself, like I'm out, I'm not gonna fight you, but you can't fight me, yada yada yada. And then Duncan goes back and talks to Amanda about that, and then they fuck, and he's like, I know what we're gonna do. And so so it's heist time, right? So so it's time for a heist. So Amanda, they have like a goofy heist where like they keep almost getting caught because Duncan's not listening to Amanda because he's too prideful, and then Amanda keeps like sassing him and not telling him everything because she's a bitch, right? But it's like Catwoman and Batman, right? And so they finally steal the cross and then a whole bunch of other stuff. And so the guy reaches out to Duncan and he's like, touche, give me my shit back. And then Duncan's like, oh no. So he's like, give me my shit back, I have Joe Dawson. And he's like, all right, fine, we'll trade it out. So then Duncan plays a little tricky trick on Thorn to get him isolated and not in a holy place, because they're going to meet in like a church, right? So a holy place, so they can't fight. And then they're going to trade out Dawson for like the artifacts, because I just wants the artifacts and be left alone, right? So he's willing to like forgive and forget this time, as long as Duncan like stays the fuck out of his business from here on out. And so Amanda goes and hides in the church, and all their artifacts like on the altar. So the Thorn brings Dawson in, dumps him off, and then grabs all his shit, and he's like yelling at Duncan, who's not actually there. Meanwhile, Duncan is playing Metal Gear Solid again, and he's like sneaking around, knocking out all this dude's like bodyguards and stuff. And so when Thorn comes out of the church to get in the car, Duncan's there with his sword. He's like, ta-da! And so they fight. Duncan obviously murders him. And that gets justice for Joe's girlfriend and whatnot. And then him and Amanda like fuck some more. And then they watch Joe play blues very well. And then Amanda starts talking to Duncan, and she's like, hey, how much you know about this guy? And Duncan's like, nothing. And she's like, you never thought to ask? I mean, he knows like everything about you in this. And Duncan's like, yeah, I mean, that's his business. If he wants to tell me, he'll tell me. And then he plays like the sweet ass like blues riff on electric guitar, and it's sad as shit, but good stuff. And that wraps up episode 4. So the next episode is kind of like its own little doohickey. It does introduce a doctor lady who becomes the next love interest of McLeod. You thought it'd be Amanda, but go fuck yourself. You're wrong. We're not doing that. So now we're moving on from the Joe Dawson arc, Joe's Pub, which shows Joe's bar continues to be like a main area of like reference. As in, so we have the Jib, we have Joe's bar. And then we're going to have like a hospital, because that's right, Duncan's going to start dating this doctor in this episode that we get introduced to. So, and Richie's still around for a bit, and so is Amanda in and out. She's like living in the area doing her own kind of shit, whatever. Anyway, the episode starts off and Duncan's hanging out with just some homies. We had no idea what the relationship is here. But it's a guy and a gal, and they have an adopted daughter who just turned like 18 or is 18. Don't worry, everybody, she's 18. That's important for later. Not because Duncan fucks her, but someone else does. So, and she is not good looking at all. Like, ugh, I can see where Duncan was like hard pass. Anyway, he she's like, she shows up in her car. She was like sleeping around the night before and like screams at her like adopted parents about her. He screams back, and then she drives like off a cliff and dies. Right? Not like suicide, but she goes and she dies. And so then Duncan goes with them to like the hospital where they're doing surgery, and it doesn't work out, and then he like is trying to comfort them and whatnot, and then he gets like the vibes, and of course Michelle here is an immortal, right? And at some point in this episode, Duncan makes like a very odd it's like contradictory statements are made, like it's like, okay, yeah, you're born an immortal, you're an immortal, but there's absolutely no way that Duncan as an immortal knows who's going to be an immortal. Like, he didn't know Richie was going to be an immortal, for example, right? But at some point, I could have sworn he said something about knowing. I think I feel like I misheard, because I thought he said, "I knew you were one of us," like the first time your parents like brought you home, and I was like, "No, you didn't. Shut the fuck up. That's not a thing that immortals could do. That has been established in like 2.25 episodes, or 2.25 seasons of this fucking show." So I must have misheard. Maybe like I'm special, and he's like, "I knew you were special." That is what I'm going to assume was the intent. Because he can't just like sense when people are going to become immortal. That's retarded. Okay. And there's no further explanation about it either. Like, it'd be one thing if it's like, oh yeah, he killed some guy who had like, because it's established in the movies with Connor McLeod that some immortals just have like extra magic abilities, or that magic's kind of real or something. And then there was that girl who could like foresee the future and whatnot in like season 1. Season 2, the beginning of season 2. So there is some accountability for that. Anyway, so then he goes back to get her out of the morgue and has to sneak around. He runs into like sexy doctor again, and she's actually very pretty. I don't know what the deal with the early 90s and like girls with like really short hair was, but because she had like Meg Ryan too, and I don't think Meg Ryan's attractive, but she was kind of like a sex symbol. Anyway, so, but it was like a thing, right? And I don't like short hair at all, so I'm always kind of like, she is very pretty. She'd be prettier with longer hair. Anyway, that's my preference generally. But there's a little bit of flirting here. There's a lot more flirting in the next episode, and then they start like a relationship essentially. And she even gets like credits, so she'll be around for a minute. That being said, old Michelle here. Okay, so Duncan goes back, tries to explain that to her immortal. She's like super excited. She keeps trying to like fuck Duncan, talking about how I always had a crush on you, and like now we can have sex, and there's no consequences to my actions. He's like, no, there's lots of consequences, and the people are gonna hunt you down and try to kill you. And she's like, whatever. And he's got to go do something somewhere. That's right. He's got to go. So then like the hospital calls the parents, and they're like, oh, hey, the body's missing. And so he goes to kind of figure out what's going on with that, and that's where he flirts with the doctor some more. Meanwhile, she gets the vibes, right? And then so she looks outside and sees some guys. So she goes out there like talk to him, and he's about to cut her head off, and he's like, oh, you're a pretty young thing. And she's like, tee-hee, tee-hee. And so this guy's name is Axel. And what he does, his like modus operandi is that he like finds young women who have become immortal, and then like has sex with them, treats them like princesses or whatever, and then uses them to like hunt other immortals. And so that obviously that's what he's going to do here. But anyway, she goes back. And when Duncan gets back, they talk about it, and she reveals that this guy Axel showed up. And then Duncan has like, we go, back in the past. I don't know when, but the same thing happened. He was at like some party. It looked like it was British, and he, this girl was like, "Oh, come have sex with me." And he's like, "No, I'm here as a guest." And she's like, "Oh, but I need your help, something." And so he goes up there, and she's like naked in bed, and he's like, "What?" And then Axel like bushes through the closet, and they fight, and then he like. They stop fighting. I don't know. They just stop. And then Axel like threatens her later on. And so later on she comes, and this is like, multiple flashbacks. She comes down. It's like, oh no, this time for realsy or whatever. He's threatening me and yada, yada, yada. And then Axel just like cuts her head off and like moseys about with his day. Right. And so Duncan has like, he keeps trying to tell Michelle that like, this is not going to work out. It's not what you think. And she's like, whatever. And then at some point he's like, I can't deal with you. You keep trying to have sex with me. I'm going to hook you up with Amanda. He doesn't say Amanda, but Amanda shows up in the episode. So we know it's her, obviously. But he's like, I got a friend who's going to like train you and help you and protect you and whatnot. And then there's even like a moment where Michelle is like, they're arguing, and then like the friend comes over, her dad, and so Duncan makes her hide, and the guy like talks about how much he loved his daughter and how he was so sad and just never felt adequate and something, and then she like sneaks on up, and Duncan's like, holy shit, what the fuck are you doing? And so he like sends the guy, he's like, anyway, you should go and relax it. And then he's like, the fuck? And she's like, I need to go talk to him. And he's like, no, you can't, they're dead to you. Like, anyway. He's like the next day he's driving her over to Amanda's when she just gets out of the fucking car and like goes to meet with Axel on his boat, and then there's like a whole thing with that, and then Duncan comes up and he's being like very aggressive with Michelle, and so Duncan like fights him and then kills him, and she like, watches, and she's like horrified about the whole situation and the quickening and all that, and she's like, okay, take me to your friend. And so then he takes her over to Amanda, and Amanda's like, ooh, I'm gonna have so much fun with you, and then Duncan's like, don't make me regret this, Amanda. Which wraps up episode 5. All right, next up is episode 6. This one stars, the monster of the week is Brian Cullen. He is an old friend of Duncan MacLeod's. He was known as like the greatest swordsman of all of Europe, and that caused some problems. Mostly in that he got tired of fighting everybody and people keeping wanting to challenge him. So then he got like super into drinking, and then he got into like other kind of drugs like heroin and like opium and stuff. Not originally heroin, opium, and then he got into heroin. Okay. So, but we start off the episode, there's just this guy drinking and being belligerent at Joe's pub, obviously, or Joe's diner, or whatever the fuck he calls it. And then Richie rolls up to like, just because he's hanging out or doing whatever, and the guy like starts threatening him, and then Richie's like, I'm not going to fight you here, there's all these people, you idiot. And he's like, I'll get you. And so Richie goes and like tells Duncan about this. He's like, man, this crazy guy. Oh no, he doesn't tell him. Yeah. I think he might bring him up at some point. But anyway, Duncan is just like running, and he's on like a bike path apparently, and he gets run into by like the doctor lady. And so they flirt, and he asks her out, and she's like, tee, no, I'm doing something. And then she gets like a call, and what happened was Brian was trying to like hunt Richie down and hit him with a car so that he could just cut his head off. And instead, he like ran into a bus, and like there's like a mass cow. So everyone's at the hospital trying to like get all these people recovered or whatever. And then Duncan's there because he was with a girlfriend lady. I'll catch her name later. And so, wait, maybe I wrote it down. Her name is Richie something, flashbacks, Duncan's difficult choices, destructive. Anne. Yeah, Anne Lindsay? I think that's her name. That's what I wrote down. I wrote Anne. Okay, so we're just going to call her Dr. Lady for now. I'm not sure. I literally just wrote that name down. I have no idea why I did that. Okay, so... I suck. So then he's at the hospital watching the doctor lady like work, and then he feels like the vibes, and then so does Brian, and then they meet each other, and then they're like hugging out because we didn't know they were friends until this point because Brian just seems like a total asshole. And then we get some like fun flashbacks. We get a flashback of them just like drinking and riding a carriage like at somewhere. And then some guy's like, oh, Your Honor, I need to challenge you or whatever. And Brian's like, all right, let's do this. And Duncan's like, you're making a huge mistake, brother. This guy's like the best swordsman in all of Europe. And the guy's like, fuck you. And so Brian kills him. And then there's some more shots. And then it gets kind of like worse and worse. Like Brian's like drinking more. And he gets like Duncan to like fight a battle for him at some point. And then like Duncan has to like track him down. And he's like in an opium den, like threatening people's lives with a sword if they don't give him more opium and stuff. And Duncan's like, holy shit. And things have not gotten better in the modern day. We see him buying like meth and stuff. So it's like, it's like getting worse. And then Duncan like confronts him, and they get into little arguments, and at some point like early on after the hospital, he takes him back to like his dojo, and Richie's there of course because Richie's like running the place, and Charlie went off to like save the Balkans or whatever. And then Richie and the guy like kind of spit words at each other, and Duncan's like, you better not fight, like this guy's my friend, whatever. And the guy's like, I'll get you later, I'm gonna stay at a hotel. And then Richie's like, holy cow, man, that guy was like on drugs. And then he finds out from the doctor lady on their like they're like, he goes to like hang out with her a couple times and ask her on a date, and we find out that guy, he like disappeared, but he was on like a lot of drugs, and then he like ran into the bus, caused all those problems. And so Duncan goes to confront him about that, and he's like, oh man, whatever, humans, fuck them, yada yada yada. And then he's like, no, not fuck them, and yada yada. And then at some point, let's see. So Duncan goes on a date. Like he finally gets the doctor to go on a date with him after her like 12-hour shift and doing surgeries or whatever. And it's like a wonderful date, and he's being super chipper and nice and whatever. And the date's just like at his dojo or something. I don't know. It didn't seem to be anywhere special, like his apartment or whatever. And she's dressed up all fancy, and he's dressed up fancy. And then she gets like beep beep beep, and she's like, oh fuck. And he's like, it's okay. We'll catch it. We'll do this another time. And she's like, you betcha. And so she leaves, and then he's like, brr. And of course it's Brian there, and he wants to fight Duncan now because Duncan's getting in the way of him killing Richie or something. So they fight for a bit, and then Brian like Duncan's about to cut his head off, and then he's like, go get help, like quit being an asshole. And so Brian's like, ugh. And so he doesn't. He goes to like back to his meth dealer and all that good stuff. And then Duncan goes to talk to Richie, and he's like, hey, your date, and Richie looks up and he's like, holy shit, man, your date looks like it went rough. And Duncan's like, it wasn't the date, it was Colin. And so he's like, man, that guy is like out of control, like you're gonna have to do something about it. And Duncan's like, no, he needs help, blah 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 blah. And Richie's like, okie dokie, well, you do you. But Brian like calls Duncan, is like, hey man, I want help, can you come see me? And then so Duncan's like, yeah, for sure. So then he goes to like the garage where Brian's like buying meth from the meth dealer, and then Brian tries to run him over with the van, and kind of runs him over with the van, but also like crashes, and then he gets like stabbed in the gut by like the broken van or something. He pulls something out of his gut, and then he hops out, and Duncan got hit by a van, so he's all like, oh fuck, and this guy's all like, fuck, because he's like bleeding out of his fucking stomach. And so then they fight, and Duncan ends up winning and cutting off his head, and he's pretty sourpuss about it. He meets up with the doctor lady later, and she's just talking about, or they talk about like having nightmares or whatever, and you know, Duncan's just like real sad about himself the whole thing, and you know, it's like a sour ending there for episode 6. Episode 7 is kind of interesting because, well, it starts off with this like homeless guy, and then it seems like this little kid is like bantering with him, and then something sus happens, and then a bit afterwards, Richie and McLeod, they feel something, and so they come up and they find this little kid, and this like 10-year-old boy who's being played by like at least a 16-year-old he's immortal. Oh no, what are they gonna do? And then Duncan gets like real protective of him, and we get some flashbacks, and we see a flashback of how during like the Civil War, I want to say, he found a boy who got killed in a battle, who's a similar age, like 10 or 12, who was actually an immortal, and he tried to take care of the kid, but at some point some other immortal found him and was like, yeah boy, time to get some of that delicious quickening going on, and so cut off his head. And this kid's like super concerned about that. Like, you know, they kind of explain everything, and they talk about protecting him and doing what's right. And then Richie gets like real sketched out by the kid, like pretty early on. Like he's like, something ain't right. And then Duncan gets like even more protective and more concerned. And then some guy shows up, and he's like, I need to kill that boy. And the kid keeps telling this like crazy story about a guy who found him, like he's been an immortal for like 4 years or something. And that this boy, this guy protected and watched over him. And they keep talking about going out and going fishing and stuff. And then Duncan's girlfriend, Doctor Lady, she gets like super concerned because Duncan's like, oh, this is like my cousin's kid. And she's like, okie dokie, what's going on? Why is he here? He needs to see a therapist. Like he's really snappy at her, right? Like really emotionally charged. And she keeps bringing up the therapy thing. And Duncan's like, yeah, we'll get to it around. And they get into like kind of a fight about it a couple times. And then like she's pretty heavily involved, right? This is like the Doctor arc, if you will. The Doctor Lady. I can't remember her name. Anyway, she, so at some point, Joe, like, I think Richie asks Joe to like look into it because this guy and everything else that's going on, and well, to look into this immortal. Duncan, I can't remember. Duncan or Richie asked about the immortal who's trying to kill the kid, and he's like, that guy's a real sweet boy. Like, he would no way he would just like kill some guy. But then they find out that like his wife was killed by like the kid, right? And she was mortal. And so the guy is just trying to like stop him because he keeps like killing people to try and draw them out or whatever. And then we find out the kid is not like 10 years old or 14 years old, right? That he's actually like 800 years old. And that he uses, this is like his modus operandi, his MO, is that he pretends to be like all innocent and needing help and whatnot. And then when he like lures like immortals to like trusting him, and then he like cuts their heads off behind their back, and it's like very sneaky. And then even when this gets brought to Duncan's like point of view, it's still like he's still like very defensive. He's like, well, what else is he supposed to do? Something. But it's not until he like starts to threaten like girlfriend Doctor that Duncan like takes it more seriously. And at some point, what happens is at some point Duncan has to fight the guy, and he doesn't cut off his head because he knows the guy's not like a bad dude, but he just leaves him, and the guy's like crying on a stairway. And then that's when, God, what's the kid's name? It's like Kenny. I think it is Kenny. Kenny comes up and like cuts his head off, and then Duncan like feels it, so he runs back, and then they get into like a row about it, and then Kenny tries to like, you know, use the Doctor to get to Duncan or whatever, and finally Duncan has to like cut off his head, and he's like sad eponymous about it. And that wraps up episode 7. In the next episode, we get another kind of like unique take on this whole situation. It's like 3 seasons in, and the writers in this have done a bang-up job. Like, it's not just like, ooh, bad guy from the past. Like, I feel like almost universally, like each one of these like immortals, like very few of them are just like assholes or evil. Like, they all have like kind of like they're very good at like coming up with like kind of unique ways, and that could just be cribbing off other stuff they know. But like, hey, it's working. So in this one, we get this this guy goes to like this girl's house, and like the sister's like, she's not home, and he's like, I know she's home. Let me see my fiance. And then she like runs away, and then later on, Duncan's like hanging out at the gym with Richie and Joe, and then he takes off, and then this girl shows up, and she's like, I'm looking for Duncan MacLeod, and they're like, he's not here, do you want to wait? And she's like, no, I'll be back later, and she like takes off, and then Duncan runs into the guy from the beginning, and dun dun dun, of course he's an immortal, and they're friends, or they used to be friends. Well, yeah, they used to be friends. They're kind of still friends. His name's David Kavanaugh, I don't know. Anyway, David. So David, we find out he has a real big problem. His big problem is that back in like, I don't know, in the 1800s in like America, kind of look like post revolutionary America. I could be wrong, but anyway, he was like banging the shit out of this chick, and she was like in love with him, and he was in love with her, but she was married to some jackass, right? And so then he wants her to like, she's just like, she's in it for like the thrill, but she's not gonna like leave her husband because she's a good Christian woman or something. That's some bullshit. Anyway, and so David gets like really hot and bothered about the whole situation. The husband like shows up, and David's gonna like kill his ass, and he beats him up real good, and then she gets like super concerned and is like, leave me alone, I don't want to be with you, something. And this is like, David's like real emotionally like, oh, I'm in love with this woman, she's loving my life, blah blah blah. Duncan tries to calm him down, but then later on he like goes back over to her place and is like, tries to like quote unquote rescue her from her life, and she's like, no, I'm here, this is my husband, I'm not leaving him. Like, our thing was just a fling. Like, he took it way more seriously than I did. And it's like, bitches, am I right? But also, this guy's a total simp, so fuck him. Anyway, it's one of those situations where everyone's an asshole. Except the husband. He's just like, man, I just want to be married to my wife. The fuck? Anyway, so that's like why he's so concerned. Because, like, I guess in this era, in the modern era, he spent his whole, like, the last 150 years or 200 years or whatever becoming, like, a master craftsman. And we even get, like, there's like a rocking chair that he gives to Duncan, and Duncan's like, I love this shit, this is fantastic. And he's like, yeah man, that's how we met, that's how I met my fiance Jill. And this, so we're getting like, so we're seeing like this woman who's clearly this Jill lady. She keeps coming trying to find Duncan, and she's super concerned, and Richie's concerned for her and keeps trying and being like, hey, this woman came looking for you, like really distraught. And then on the other side we get like David's point of view, where they're like happily engaged, everything's going great, and you know, yada yada, and him and Duncan are just hanging out and doing stuff. And then at some point, like, all the worlds collide. Like, she comes to see Duncan, and like Richie's there, and like everybody's there essentially, and then it comes to like the guy's gonna like kill Duncan if Duncan tries to help this woman like get away from him, because she belongs to him, and it's like, no one belongs to you. And the whole story is that they were like dating and things were going out pretty well. Oh, she was like, she flirted with him and got like one of her clients to be ahead of on his list of like building furniture out of wood or whatever. And then they started dating and everything was great, and they got engaged. And so of course he like showed her that he was an immortal, and she like freaked the fuck out and was like, I'm out. Nope, I don't want this. I want kids. I don't want to deal with all this crazy nonsense. And then he's not been able to deal with it well. He's like kind of lost his mind. And so Duncan tries to like reason with him a few different times, and it just doesn't go well at all. And so of course they end up fighting, and then Duncan like reluctantly kills him, and it's just like, wah, wah, wah. So then Duncan's like super sad eponymous about all that stuff, and yeah, wraps up that episode. Oh, I forgot to mention, I totally blew this. So the doctor lady's in this a bunch, right? Of course, because she's around and she's dating Duncan and she's in the arc. Sorry, I took some notes, but I didn't take that many because I was like, I vaguely remember what's going on. Okay, so the doctor lady, she gets involved because her and Jill like become friends of hippopotamuses. God, I totally missed all this shit. It's like I recalled it as soon as I kind of finished talking about this episode. So they do fight, and he does kill him. But the reason that happens is because so Duncan and Dr. Lady are like helping Jill like and trying to deal with this, and Duncan's trying to get David to walk down and stop being such an asshole. And then Jill ends up like going and staying with the Dr. Lady, and then the guy like threatens, and then the girl like runs off, and David like chases her to like the top of a building, and then she ends up getting like knocked off the building and dying, right? And then David's like freaking the fuck out. And I think that's when they fight, and then he dies. Hold up. All right, so I went back and watched the end of the episode again. So, fuck me. No, he does not behead David. So they fight, and then he like leaves David to be sad about killing Jill and all that stuff, and then moves on with his day. So sad times. All right, in the next episode, episode 9, Duncan's having like a real hard time. He's starting to have like these very vivid nightmares and dreams and stuff. This episode gets kind of wacky. Now, to be fair, Highlander Final Dimension? No, what was it called? Is that what it was called? Anyway, the one that was the chronological sequel to Highlander 1, which is actually Highlander, the third movie. We learned that some immortals have like legit magic, and then in first season of Highlander 1, we learned that some humans also have like legit magic, as in like foreseeing. So magic exists. So the reason I bring that up is because we meet Garrick here. Garrick's an old friend of Duncan's. They both were like around during like the witch trials somewhere. I want to say America, but it could have been Germany for all I know. Anyway, because there was a lot of witch trials in Germany, which is that the whole thing with the witch trials and the hysteria fits very well in with German and American culture today, if you think about it. Anyway, so they're at the witch trials, and they go and they save these women, and then they like ride off because they know they're not witches. And then Garrick, and they're both immortals at this point. They both know they're immortals. At this point, Garrick gets caught. Duncan doesn't realize this. He just thinks his buddy like rode off and did fuck like the other bitch and did whatever. But Garrick gets caught and set on fire, and that kind of drives him crazy. And he develops like a real anger towards Duncan MacLeod that we don't find about to the very end of the episode. So then Duncan keeps having these dreams and these thoughts, and he keeps thinking he's seeing this cloaked figure, and he talks to Joe about it, and then he runs into Garrick, and Garrick's like a sculptor, and because he had like some derangement or something at some point, he like hung out with Freud and Jung and all these guys and just like learned everything he could about like psychology and stuff, and somehow because of that he developed some sort of like telekinetic powers or telepathy of some sort. Because over time, and Anne's like trying to get him to help, trying to get him to go to therapy. He keeps freaking out at her. He almost kills Richie at one point because he thinks Richie is like the cloaked man who's like haunting him in his dreams and all this stuff. And it deals with that. And then he goes to talk to Garrick, and Garrick like gives him like some tincture to like help him like rest better and like get better sleep or whatever. But it's all like a ploy to get Duncan like drunk on this drug so that he can sneak in there and like kill him, because he tells him like, oh hey, the best way to get over there like fighting this thing is to just let it do what it's going to do. Like it can't actually hurt you, it's just all in your mind. And so the Garrick shows up dressed like in the cloak, and then they start trying to fight, and we find out that Garrick like implanted like somehow like with some sort of like mind power, like he learned about the mind so hardcore that he's able to like reach out to Duncan's mind or some bullshit and like implant these thoughts. Anyway, the episode focuses very heavily on Anne and Duncan's relationship like completely falling apart. Like in the previous episode with Jill, at some point Jill had almost told Anne that Duncan and them were immortals, but she was like interrupted because she assumed Anne knew. Anne's the name of the doctor, right? I finally wrote the name down. Okay, so and so this episode, again, it's just like a lot of it's just like nightmares that Duncan's having. He had some like funny flashbacks, which are just like repeats of other things he's had, which are kind of odd. Just thinking about past shit, and like a lot of it's kind of it's really trying, and I don't think it's failing, but it's trying to kind of make this point that like, you know, if you lived like hundreds of lives and you've had all these like dead family members and people you love just like rot away and die, get killed or whatnot, it can be pretty traumatic, even if you're like immortal, right? Like your brain is still not going to always have like the best way of coping with this stuff, and so you got to like learn how to deal with it. So therapy would be the best answer, but at the same time he's not going to do it. So and then, you know, he keeps yelling at Anne, or he's not sleeping well, and they get into a big fight. Anyway, so finally he has to fight Garrick when he's all drugged up, and he's still able to beat him and cut his head off, and he's sad about that because Garrick's kind of friend. And then, you know, Richie's there the whole time running the place and like helping him kind of like try to deal with that. And then at the very end, he brings in this statue he bought from Garrick, and he's like, hey, get rid of this thing to Richie. And Richie's like, got it. And then Anne walks in, and Richie's like, oh, I'll go do that right now. So he leaves, and then Anne breaks up with him, which ends the Anne arc because she is gone now forever. She still shows up in the credits for the next like couple episodes, which is odd because she is not in them because they're broken up. But yeah, there you go. That's the end of Anne. She came and she went, and she was okay. She was hot, but you know. So this episode starts off with a guy fucking his mistress who wants him to divorce his wife and be with her, and he's like, nah baby, I'm not gonna divorce my wife, she will something, even though his wife also wants to get divorced. He's just a scumbag. He's like a scumbag. I think he's a lawyer, but he's a scumbag lawyer, and he films them having sex too. Like, why? Who knows? Anyway, so he's walking back from like his horse place, and then he sees like Duncan fighting another immortal and then cutting his head off and then quickening everything, and then Duncan sees him and he's like, fuck. So then Duncan goes to like harass Joe about it, and Joe's like, that's not a Watchers, that's not what we do, we don't record things, like that's not us. And then he's like, we'll look into it. And so then Duncan then Joe is like, no, it's not one of us. And then Duncan's like, okay, I think I figured out where this guy lives somehow, so let's go check it out. So him and Joe go do like what do you call it when cops like sneak on people? They do a snoop. It's not called a snoop. I thought it starts with an S. Anyway, they do that thing where like private investigators like take pictures of your wife cheating on you with her ex or whatever. And God, it's on the tip of my tongue. Anyway, So they do that, and they find the guy because he like figured out the license plate or something. And so then Duncan like approaches him and demands the tape back, and the guy's like, "Oh no, you're gonna do something for me too." And because I want you, so he like hides the tape in the house, and the wife's like yelling at him like, for cheating on her and stuff. And he's like, "Why don't you just leave me?" And she's like, "Well, blah blah blah. That's what you would want, you asshole." And it's like, I don't know, stupid people, man. Anyway, so and then meanwhile, while this is kind of going on, we find out about Cord. So Cord and the other asshole that Duncan just killed are like a team, and Duncan's trying to kill them both because like way back in the day, they were like complete assholes, and they like killed like they killed somebody and then blamed it on like his friend, and then also Duncan, and Duncan got like hung, and then he was gonna like fight them, but then like ran off like little bitches and stuff. So and like his friend got like killed or something. It was like a whole thing. And so Duncan like found them and like wants revenge, right? So he's gonna like take care of it. So he killed one of them, and he wants to kill this other guy as well. But meanwhile, Cord gets like pulled into this whole thing because then this guy who's trying to blackmail Duncan into like killing his wife, otherwise he's gonna expose everything, like hears about these guys and he sees them about to fight, and then when he pops out, because you're not supposed to fight in front of immortals, Cord's like, we'll come back later, and Duncan's like, this evening, and the guy's like, that sounds good. It's like very yes, the duel's at dawn. All right, see you then, my lord. And so Cord leaves, and the guy's like, I got a better idea, I'll kill that guy. And Duncan's like, you better stay the fuck out of this. And then he's like, no, I got a pistol, I'll shoot him. And he's like, dude, you're gonna get fucked if you try to do anything. And so then essentially Duncan shuts him down completely. So then the lawyer guy goes and tracks down this Cord guy, and when he comes to the Cord guy, Cord's like doesn't give a fuck, so he just straight up kills him, right? And then Duncan's like, fuck, because Joe's like, isn't that gonna solve your problem? He's like, no, because meanwhile, while that was going on, Duncan like snuck into the guy's house, found the tape, and like was gonna leave, and then the wife showed up and saw him, and so he's like, oh hey, just so you know, I'm taking this tape and I'm leaving, you should just mind your business. And she like has a gun, and he's like, don't use that, I'm just gonna go. And so like now it's like, oh man, if her husband ends up being dead, something. Anyway, so Cord, after he like kills this guy, he goes and like kidnaps this lady or whatever, so Duncan has to go rescue her, and then and then they fight, and then Duncan's able to kill Cord in a pretty badass battle as usual. And then afterwards, Joe and Duncan and the lady are like chit-chatting, and Joe's like, hey, she's like, can I do anything to help you? And Joe steps in, or can I do anything for you? You saved my life. And Joe's like, don't ever talk about the tape. And she's like, what tape? And he's like, the tape with the thing. And she's like, I have no idea what you're talking about, you dumbass. And Joe's like, oh, got it. And so that wraps up that episode. In episode 11, we focus a lot on Benny, who's like a 2-time gangster, but not really. He's like one of those like goofball like gangster guys. He just keeps getting into trouble with like the mafia, and he has like all these scams to like make money, but they always kind of fall through. Anyway, we get a lot. Okay, so the background is there's this gangster that's gonna like cement shoes Benny and throw him in the river, but Benny's an immortal. So he like throws Duncan under the bus. He's like, I can get Duncan MacLeod for you, and you can take care of him. Duncan MacLeod's dead. Something, I shot him. Says, is that guy's name? Joey. Yep, Joey, some Italian name, La Mota. So, and then the guy's like, oh no, his grandson, something. It's like, oh yeah, I want his grandson dead too. And I'm like, that's kind of shoddy writing. Like, why would you care? But I guess he does, and he's around. Also, this episode seems to be it seems to be playing outside of order. So in the previous episode, Anne is like gonzies completely, like just not talked about, not in the episode at all. In this episode, she like rolls on back and is like, I apologize for being a cunt. And Duncan's like, that's okay, you're still hot. I forgive you. And then, she's like not predominant, but she's like in the episode. And then in the following episode, she's like gone again, completely gone, like not brought up at all. And so it's one of those things where it's like, okay, it's like, and she's still on like the credits at this structure, but I mean, they make the credits for like the whole season. They don't really change them usually in these kind of shows. So she'll probably be there like the whole time, unless something very dramatic happens. So yeah. Okay. So then Benny goes and talks to Duncan and essentially tricks Duncan into like going and getting involved with like the mafia. And then this Joey guy, who's like an old man dying of cancer now, because there's like a whole backstory with that. He like shoots him and throws him into like the river. And then Benny tracks him down a little bit later and is like, "Oh, Duncan, thanks, bro." And Duncan's like, "I'm so pissed off at you." And he's like, "Why, man? Blah, blah, blah." And then Benny keeps trying to like wise guy it up with like Richie too. And Richie just is like listening to his stories and kind of like, "All right, man, whatever," which is a funny side story. Like I said, Anne comes around. And then, Duncan's he's mostly pissed at Benny because it's like, bro, I can't just die. Like this guy's going to like see me around town if he's around town. And he's like, "Nah, man, he's got like cancer. He'll be dead soon. Don't worry about it. Trust me, bro." It's that kind of attitude. And so what we get, I'm trying to remember. And so Benny tries to go and like talk to this guy and like talk him down or whatever. And then he shoots him, supposedly killing him as well. And then Duncan comes by to... then Anne like asks some questions about the situation, and like the new deal is like they can go out, but she's got to like not ask too many questions. But then I guess she can like earn questions, like an erotic visual novel. Like a fucking corruption game. And so she does something, and then he's willing to tell her where he's like originally from, and he's like Scotland, and she's like, "Good, okay." Like, okie dokie. So dumb. Anyway, so Duncan goes to like confront this guy and runs into, I can't remember her name is, some lady, and that lady's important. Okay, so I guess we should talk about the past now. So back in like mobster era, like 20s or whatever, Duncan meets Benny and they end up going to like this club, and he ends up dancing with this like singer, right? And she's very beautiful and all this stuff, supposedly one of the best singers around and all this stuff, like super famous, like people know about her from like years ago. Because there's a part in the episode where, and this is the good writing, is where like she's out and about with Joey, her now husband, in like the present, and she's recognized by some older guy, and he's like, "Oh, you're the best singer and dancer," and yada yada yada. And she's like, "Oh, thanks, I haven't done that in a while." And anyway, so in the past, so Duncan like dances with her, and then like Joey's brother, who's running like their operation, their like little gang operation or whatever, their businesses, quote unquote. And then Joey is like the accountant or whatever. So then anyway, Joey's brother, whatever his name is, older brother, he's like with this girl, and he's all smoochy on her, and he gets super jealous when she's dancing with McLeod. And then Duncan and Benny like head out, and they're just like moseying about town or whatever in Gotham back in the 20s. And then some guy rolls up and is like, "Oh, hey, so and so, or the lady wants to see you again." And Duncan's like, "Oh yeah, boy, here we go." So he goes back, and then meanwhile, back in like the dressing room or whatever for the girl, she's like making out with the older brother, and he's like, "Why you dunk?" And then she makes some comment about him like flirting with other girls, and he's like, "Oh, that's just part of keeping up appearances, baby. Don't worry about it." And he's like, "What about you and that Duncan fellow?" And then she's like, "I was just trying to make you jealous, baby." It's such like a 1920s like mob movie. Anyway, don't worry about it, Joey. Then Duncan shows up, and so the older brother goes to like take care of that, and he rolls in, and he's like, what are you doing here?" And then Duncan's like, "Oh, so and so asked me to come back," and he's like, "No, she didn't. I know she didn't." And then Joey walks in and shoots both of them, and is like, "Ta-da!" And then because of the gunfire, and then like throws the gun down at like Duncan's feet or whatever, and then because of the gunfire, the lady like runs in, and she's like, "No, my boyfriend! You know what happened?" And Joey's like, "We gotta take care of these. They killed each other in like some heated rage. I'll take care of you, baby. Don't worry about it." And that's how he ended up with the girl. And so I guess for some reason in the present, like, just that's the thought that Duncan has some sort of like progeny that's like around minding their own fucking business. He's got to take care of it. So Jesus. Anyway, so he's about to kill Duncan again, or like no, he's about to shoot him or something. And then the lady hears like all this stuff. Like they like recall how Joey's actually the one who shot Duncan and his brother, and then she's mad because she married Duncan, or she married Joey, and like he took care of her and stuff, but she never like got over like his older brother and like being in love and like what happened there and whatnot. And so and then also like she's like, I don't know, something about seeing Duncan MacLeod again, who looks exactly like the Duncan MacLeod she danced with that one night like 100 years ago, which is like, okay, sure. stirred something in her. So when Joey tries, like when she finds out Joey's the one who killed her brother, and they made it so, or his brothers, so made it so she couldn't marry him. She shoots him instead of him shooting whatever, and then Duncan like takes the gun and like wipes it off and throws it on the ground. I was like, let's get you out of here. And so that's that. And so then he's hanging out with Benny later. And he's like, here's a ticket. Get the fuck out of here. Don't come back. And Benny's like, oh, Ben, I got some ideas. And he's like, nope. You're going to get the fuck out of here. And then Benny's like, oh, let's take me to Chicago. And he's like, you bet. Don't come back. See you around. And Benny's like, oh, shit. Oh, shamucks. And heads off, which ends that episode. This next episode is like, this is where we're crossing the Rubicon into like the second half of the season. And again, there's no Anne, as I mentioned in the previous review. So this one is kind of a recap episode. So back in the day, for those new kids out there who haven't seen this, most shows, most sitcoms or dramas or whatever would have like one episode a season, which they called like a recap episode or like a clip show or whatever. And there would be like some minuscule amount of like story where it would like be a reason for everybody to just like talk about events that had occurred like previously in the season, or maybe even in seasons past, just to kind of like, the writers are tired and they need like a break. It's like their mid-season break or whatever. And so there's like the bare bones of the episode. So this episode goes pretty quick. It starts off with this beautiful like Chinese lady like swimming, and then this guy, this douchebag, a white guy, of course, right? Am I right? No, just kidding. It's written in like the early 90s. Anyway, so this guy comes up, and she's like in the water, and so she's like, let me get my sword and we'll fight. And he's like, I don't think so. And he like cuts off her head, and then there's some like scheming old hag that is like behind him, and she's like smirking, right? And so then the episode focuses a lot on the watchers. So Joe meets up with some other watchers, and they play cards and like chat about things, and they're doing that. And then that lady's there because she's a watcher, she's not an immortal, and she's like super creepy, and she gets like super upset because like the guy who was like watching Mei Ling in like Hong Kong is now over here in Gotham just hanging out, playing cards. And they're talking about how, you know, part of being a watcher is being like, they're just like talking about the different battles and different like stuff they've seen and whatnot and some of the previous things like Darius and whatnot. So we get a lot of clips of like Duncan doing different fights. We see stuff with like, fuck. Why did I forget his name? I just said it. God damn it. Darius. With Darius doing monk stuff and all that good jazz and whatnot. And the lady gets like super mad and is like yelling at him and is like, Mei Ling just died and she's just like one of these cards and you just fuck these cards, blah, blah, blah. And everyone's like, holy shit, calm the hell down. Anyway, because he found out that Mei Ling has died, Joe brings like Mei Ling's like register, and I guess they've been tracking her since like the 1700s, to Duncan, because Duncan and her had like an intimate relationship. And much like the Japanese guy whose name eludes me right now, so we get some flashbacks of that as well. Some clips from that. Once he had to commit seppuku to like respect the emperor, Duncan traveled to Mongolia. I don't think it was even China, like she's Mongolian, to Mongol, but you know, I think the girl playing her is actually Chinese. Anyway, it's like Mei Shan. Did I write this down? Mei Ling Xiao or something. Mei Duncan Pass. I don't remember. Anyway, Mei something. I think it is like Mei Ling Xiao. Anyway, she's like a great fighter, and she's an immortal. So Duncan like tracks her down. He like loses this wrestling match. He goes to this chick. She beats the shit out of him because he's like, you're a woman. And then they like talk a little bit about how she got trained and how she had to like fight the guy who trained her. And then he like respected that. And so then he taught her, and now she teaches like Chinese, like Kung Fu essentially, or like whatever martial arts, because he didn't complete getting like trained by this like old Japanese guy. Which is why he's so good. And it's important. This flashbacks are very important because the way he ends up beating this like cheater guy who's working with like the old hag is by just using martial arts. Because the way this guy's only been an immortal for like 20 years, and they talk about how he's killed so many immortals and how it seems very like sus, right? Because he seems to have like, and then she's like, no, he's really that good, trust me. But eventually Duncan or Joe and like one of his other guys are talking about Darius, talking about Duncan, and Duncan talking about this chick, and Duncan just like rolls in the bar. And he's like, "What's up, homie? Here's that thing you gave me. Adios." And the guy's like, "Holy shit, man, you're doing the same thing that lady's doing." And Joe's like, "It's not like what you think." And he's like, "No, man, that's exactly what I think. You have a vow, blah blah blah." Gives him a hard time. Joe has like a crisis of conscience, so he goes and tells Duncan they can't be best friends forever anymore. Same thing with Richie, who's like got them all courtside tickets to like Gotham City basketball or whatever. The Bats, I guess. Who knows? And then goes off, and then we get like a and then Duncan is like, "I'm gonna go to my special secret island," which was, we haven't seen that since like season 2, and it's where like the Indian sacred thing is, and he goes there to like meditate and stuff, and there was like a whole thing, and that's where he went like after Tessa died and yada yada. So it's sacred ground, so he gets like, he can be left the fuck alone, and it's like on an island, so he doesn't even take a sword. He just kind of goes and like chills and like thinks about life and like whatever. And then at some point, the other guy figures out that the lady's like helping the other immortal, the young immortal, kill people, and so he's like gonna report her and get her like murdered, essentially, like fired from the organization, which leads to death as far as I'm understanding. And then so she runs him over with a car, and then she overhears like the thing about Duncan being on the island and whatnot, and so she sends that guy to go wait for him as soon as he comes off the island, and then he's gonna like pounce. And then Joe figures out that she's like leading this guy on and feeding him information and whatnot because he overhears something, right? It's a lot of that. And so then he calls Richie, so Richie like races over there, and I was like, oh, finally, it's like Richie's been an immortal for like 2 seasons, like a season and a half. We've never seen this dude like fight an actual battle. I'm so excited. Nope. Duncan comes off the island, and this dude like sneaks up like a fucking Dark Souls boss, like out of the brush. It's like, and the music's playing, and then he tries to fight him, but Duncan is like such a kung fu master. He like beats him and then kind of runs away a little bit, and he's able to like get the sword out of his hands, and then they like wrestle and fall into like the river, and they fall down like this waterfall up on this like, it's like a bridge waterfall. It's not like a real waterfall. And then there's like a sword there, and they both like crawling towards it because they both like fell down a fucking waterfall. And then Richie's like on his little like moped or whatever, and he like gets there, and then he sees like the quickening happening with like the lightning and everything, and he's like, oh no. And then Duncan like crawls his way out of the bushes. Meanwhile, the lady was trying to like double more in this guy that someone else was coming or whatever, and then Joe like held her in place. And so then at some point Duncan like rolls back into Joe's bar, and she like freaks out and like runs off, and Joe's like, what's up, good to see you. And then Duncan's like, oh, can we be friends now, you little bitch? And like, you know, rubs his head. you scamp. Because Joe is like 70 years old, but Duncan's like 500 years old. So it's like a child. You know, and that wraps up episode 12. This next episode focuses on the redemption arc. The redemption of this guy named Kyrian. So who's Kyrian? Kyrian, so the episode actually starts off, we see Kyrian, he's like doing church stuff at a church, like blessing people or something and talking about, people are like, oh, you're so good, you've changed my life, yada yada. And then one of these guys, Matthew, I think is his name, who he's like helped out, is like walking out into the street and gets a little disoriented or whatever, and this car is about to hit him, and so Kyrian like pushes him out of the way and gets hit by the car. He then ends up in Anne's like emergency room or surgery office. I don't know. She's like a doctor who does doctor stuff. So I'm not exactly sure what her specialty is supposed to be, but it seems like emergency room surgery. But at the same time, she gets paged a lot, which is not something like an emergency room doctor does, because emergency room doctor like does the triage initially and then just like passes the person on to like someone else, right? So they can go and like do 15 more like emergency surgeries or whatever. It's the same issue that I have with Grey's Anatomy. The reason I bring Grey's Anatomy up is because my wife's watching it, and they're all supposed to be like, at some point they're all supposed to be like emergency room surgeon residents or whatever, but they spend like a lot of time just like goofing off in the hospital doing other random bullshit. And I'm like, that's not how that works. But anyway, whatever, who cares? That's not the point of the show. The point of the show is mid women hooking up with Chad men. So fair enough. Like, mission accomplished. Oh man. Anyway, what's next? Oh, okay, yeah. So then Kyrian, after Anne like fails at resuscitating him, she goes to tell Matthew that like he's dead, and then Kyrian like walks out of the operating room or whatever alive. And Duncan hears about this from Anne, and he is like, that's not right. And so him and Richie go to like track this guy down, because not only does Duncan think he knows who it is, he's going by like a different name now. He's going by like Cage or something. But immortals, like the whole point of being an immortal is like, hey, if you're in a situation where you're like dead, you're supposed to like slink off, which is very good setup for the next episode, but we'll get there when we get there. And just kind of start a new life, right? That way you're like keeping the whole thing under wraps, which is like part of like the modus operandi of immortals, because you don't want like all these humans like hunting you down and stealing your quickening deliciousness or whatever. All right, so he tracks down Cage, and then he recognizes him as this Kyrian guy, and then we have like some flashbacks. We have flashbacks of Kyrian doing some like really messed up stuff, like during the Spanish Civil War, which is when like Ferdinand took over. He was like an actual fascist, not like a pretend fascist like Hitler, but King Ferdinand, I think it was King Ferdinand. Anyway, it was the fascist took over the country and ran it for like 60 years or something, and just did like normal state. Like fascism is it's essentially the government and corporations teaming up to like be the most efficient and whatnot, and it worked pretty well in all the countries that it was tried. And so people who are like, oh, fascism, you're a fascist, it's like I'm efficient at like government efficiency. Like the whole socialist thing where they like purged people, that's a socialist thing for anyone who's concerned. And not like actual socialism, right? I'm not trying to say like if you're a socialist in ideals and according to like how it's originally written, but every country that's tried like socialism, like Germany, like China, like Russia, like all these countries, like it involves a lot of like purges. Because without a good purge, you can't really force the issue on people, and people aren't naturally going to go along with socialism. So that's really the issue at hand, especially on like a mass situation. Like you can have, again, like with communism and stuff, you can easily have it. You have it in your family for the most part if your family's not jacked up, because everyone like works together towards a common good and like makes agreements on what should and should not be done. But when you try to mass scale it, then it becomes like the socialist nightmare that we have known multiple times in history, and it defaults back into like a tyranny and a despotism. But that aside, oh goodness. Okay. So we see. Okay, so Duncan is like working with the anti-governmental forces, like in the Civil War. The anti-Ferdinand forces, and so him and his buddy like set up some dynamite to like blow up a bridge to help with like their side, and then they got betrayed by Kyrian, who was like hanging out with them and stuff, and then the guy got killed, and then Ferdinand was able to take over and whatnot. And then later on we get like a flashback, and it's out in the what's that country that had like a similar kind of messed up situation? Starts with a C. It's Cambodia. So he was over in Cambodia trying to rescue children during like around the Vietnam War, after the Vietnam War era, and then Kyrian again like sold the kids out or whatever, and like But then we learn that Kyrian, because of this thing, like essentially the mass killing of children, he finally had like a change of heart on like mortals and like their affairs and like his role in like their existence and whatnot, and so he made a change. But there's like an investigative reporter trying to like undo all of Kyrian's work by trying to find ties to him and like this Cambodian stuff and everything. And when Matthew finds out about that, he kills the reporter to protect Kyrian. But then later, Kyrian discovers, at some point Anne like calls Duncan out and is like, hey, this guy has the same thing as you, like no medical history, nothing like that. And he's like, don't worry about it, just be quiet, woman. And she gets like upset again. Right, so. But anyway, so then Duncan and Kyrian are like, they're like having a heated discussion at like the church about everything Kyrian's done and his change of heart and how he's a different person now and how Duncan just needs to like trust him. And there's like everybody, like Joe is like telling Richie at some point in the episode all the messed up stuff he's done, which includes like more than just like the flashbacks, and he's like, man, something. And Richie's like, really gonna forgive this guy? And he's like, it's not my place to judge if we can all change, we've all done crazy crap in the past and whatnot. It looks like he's like forgiven him, but guess who hasn't forgiven him? The Matthew guy. So Matthew, when he overhears all this stuff that he did in his past, he can't like rectify like the man of God who's like a messiah figure who like came back from the dead with like all the messed up warmongering and war profiteering and stuff he's done in his past. And so he has like a real crisis of faith. And so then he ends up confronting Kyrian and like shooting him. And then Duncan's there. I can't remember exactly why. He went to go back and like talk to Kyrian about something else. And he, I think it might have been like when he heard the argument, like they're having like a discussion about it and how he's changed. And that's when the guy overhears, and then he shoots Kyrian and he's like, oh, blah, blah, blah. And then he's going to like kill himself. And Duncan tries to like talk him down. He's like, no, you can't do that. That's not what Kyrian wanted. I don't care, Kyrian. You lied to me. Something, blah, blah, blah. And eventually he goes and like sacrifices himself to like the police, right? A police suicide kind of situation. Because they have like a SWAT hostage situation going on. It's like real crazy. And then at the end, Duncan just kind of like thinks about all the crazy stuff that happened and being like, and then Kyrion's like, they end up like shaking hands, and Kyrion just like heads off to like restart his life again, but to continue to learn from like the mistakes of the past. And they decide that maybe someday they can be friends. All right, this next episode is kind of like the mid-season change, as in this is the official end of the Anne arc. So I was wrong about, I'm probably wrong about the season episode placement, because we had like Anne disappear and then come back and then disappear again and then come back and then get back together with Duncan, and I just assumed all that stuff was like disparate. But no, those episodes, they all take place during like the big Anne arc, even when she's not involved whatsoever. They just take place during the time periods when they're like broken up, it seems, because this is really where it kind of wraps up Anne's whole thing. So, and this is also the episode that introduces Callus, who's like the immortal. He's like the boss of this like second half of season 3 of like this arc, the Callus arc, if you will. And he is the main, like he's like the main antagonist going forward through the rest of this season, and kind of what the rest of the season is building up to with like everything else that's going on. Okay, so that being said, we start off Duncan and Anne. And I can't remember if Joe's there or not. Anyway, Duncan and crew are like at this performance of monks, and they're singing, and it's so beautiful and wonderful. And Anne's like, "Oh, you're so great." And then we find out that one of these guys, Paul, is an old friend of Duncan's, and that he's an immortal as well. And they just chit chat, and like Paul, there's like some funny jokes about him like putting like stamping records, and it's like, nah bro, we got CDs now, like we don't do that shit, because he's been like in a monastery for like hundreds of years, and so he's not really like upkept with like modern technology or whatever. Like I think he sent a letter to Duncan, like he didn't just call him on the phone, because they don't have that kind of shit at the monastery apparently. Anyway, they're going to meet up later and just chit-chat and catch up and whatnot. And then after Duncan leaves, this like stranger shows up. We find this is Callus, and he confronts Paul because he's the one who like paid for his group to like come out of the monastery and sing and like get some extra money to like help out with like their organization. And so he drew him out so that he could murder him. So then he does. They have a sword fight, and Callus wins. Meanwhile, Duncan and Anne are waiting, and he never shows up. And then Duncan gets like very concerned about the whole situation, as he should. And then a lot of the weird stuff starts happening, like Joe's bar gets like condemned because it's been used to like sell drugs, and then Anne keeps having like her signature on like patients, giving them like stuff that would like that honestly like kills them, like people who are like allergic to things. There's like a medical note in their chart that's like she approved like giving them some sort of medication, and she's like, "Oh, I'm so tired. I don't know if that's me. Like, I don't think I did that, but I clearly signed it," and yada yada yada. And all this stuff is kind of like to fuck with Duncan. And meanwhile, we're getting like, so why does Callus want to fuck with Duncan and this brother Paul guy so much? So we go back into like the 1800s at some point, and Duncan like finds him. I think it's 1800s. It seems like it's after he got back from Japan and Mongolia and stuff. So like early 1800s. I'm sure there's like a chronology that I could like figure out at some point. Maybe we'll look at that. But for now, we're going to keep talking about this. So Duncan ends up at like this monastery, and this monastery is specifically set up to like house immortals. Like it's not like not everyone's here an immortal, but the guy who runs it, this brother Paul guy, he's an immortal, and he comes here and he wants to give like sanctuary to immortals. And so if they want to come and just like chill out for a while and like learn from each other and feel safe, like this is holy ground, so they can do that. And that's all set up. And so Duncan's there chilling, and then he meets Callus, who's like a singer and a musician, and they talk about Shakespeare, and he talks about like Shakespeare's new play Macbeth, and like the guy has like a copy of it, and Duncan's like, I can't read English, I can only read like Latin and like Chinese, Japanese or something. And he's like, oh, let me teach you to read. So he teaches him how to read English, and they become like friends, and the brother Paul's there, and they're like super homies and whatnot. And then at some point, one of these other like immortals who's like around, he's like leaving, and then Callus like confronts him as soon as he's off like holy ground, and then fights and kills him. And then Duncan and Paul see this, and Duncan wants to fight him like immediately, but then Paul's like, no, just get out of here, you're exiled from this place, because this guy's like a monk or something, like Callus. And he gets like super mad. He's like, what, that's not on holy ground, what do you care? And it's like, what are you fucking talking about? Like, this whole place is supposed to be like a sanctuary for immortals, and you're just using it to like feed on immortals. Like, that's fucked up. Like, get the fuck out of here. And so then Callus is like held hatred in his heart because of like him being an asshole and being caught being an asshole, which is honestly super good writing, because that's how most assholes are. They're more mad about being caught being assholes than actually like the fucked up shit they did and like the betrayal and stuff. Like you see this all the time, especially now that people are like wide open books on the internet for some insane reason. They'll like confess all their like stupid bullshit that they do that makes like no logical sense whatsoever, and they're just doing it because they're hateful, and then they act like victims, right? Like this, you see tons of this shit like all the time. Okay, so now he's fucking up. Like he's the one who's forging Anne's signature. He like paid some drug addict to say that like Joe's bar was like dealing drugs, and that his he like hit a stash over there and stuff. Like he's fucking with everybody. And Richie in this episode is like off doing like a racing tournament or something. I don't remember. He won. He comes back at some point like in the episode and it's like, ta-da, I won. And they Joe and Duncan are like very sad, and he's like, I won. So that he gets caught up. And so it's like, what can they do? It's like, well, they got to figure out who this Callus guy is so they can like stop him, right? Because he's causing all these fucking problems. Because Duncan has to go and like use like signature theory, which is like comparing someone's signature, which is like quote unquote unique, with a forger's, and how it's going to be different because there's no perfect way to do it. And it gets like Anne's job back, and then he does like something else with like to get Joe's like bar back or something. Like he goes and like tracks down the guy who like was the witness who got paid off by Callus, and like drags him on the street essentially in his car to get him to confess about that getting paid off by Callus, and then to go to the police and like let him know and everything. And so Joe gets his bar back, and Anne gets her like medical license back because she's not like Dr. Death over here. And then they're trying to figure out what to do with Callus. And then he calls, and he's like, meet me here, Duncan MacLeod. And Duncan's like, I'm going to go find. Richie's like, you want me to come with you? And he's like, no, take care of Anne. And so Richie goes off to do that, and Duncan goes off to fight this guy, and he's just like hanging out at like the original opera house where he was singing. And it's like, all right, let's fight this. And so they start fighting. But then when Richie goes to talk to Anne for Duncan, the nurse there who knows they're dating is like, oh yeah, I don't know, she got this fax and then ran off. And Richie looks at it, and it's like, meet me at like the opera house, Duncan. And Richie's like, fuck. So he runs over there because Anne's already on her way over there. And so in the middle of like the fight, Anne like rolls into the opera house that's just like wide open and not in the middle of the night with no show, which is not weird at all. But that's kind of a good thing because Duncan he's like getting beat by this guy. Like he's gotten stabbed, and he's like about to fall off the edge here. And then and he doesn't want to do it because if he falls off the edge, Callus is just going to come down and cut off his head. But then when Anne walks in, it's like fortuitous because then he's like, all right, adios bitches. And Callus is like, fuck you, I'll get you eventually. And there's like a thing where he's like, he points at his neck and he's got some sort of scar, and he's like, a knife did this or something. And I was like, pretty sure we've never seen this guy before. And in the background, I don't remember them getting into a fight like in the flashback, so I'm not exactly sure what that was all about. I might have just missed something because I'm an idiot. So then Duncan falls to his death, and then Anne runs up and she's like, no. And then Richie comes running in, and he's like, oh. And then like the next day or whatever, it's like Duncan's declared dead and he's gone into the morgue or whatever, right? And then but then Richie comes out of like, he's like at the gym, and he sees Anne just like standing around at the gym, and he's like, hey, you doing okay? And they like chit chat about how much she like actually loved Duncan and yada yada yada, and how she's gonna miss him, and how's Richie doing? Richie's like, oh yeah, it's super sad. He's fine, but pretending to be sad. And then she like leaves, and that's the end of her, as far as I know. And then Duncan comes down, and him and Richie go back and forth about Anne really loving. Maybe he should tell her. And he's like, no, it's better this way. That way she can't get hurt. I can't deal with like another Tessa situation. Right. So he's still hearing a lot of drama with that, which is excellent writing. And so Duncan is most likely going off to Paris. We'll see in the next episode. But that would be my base level assumption. But yeah, that ends that's like the official end of like the first half of season 3, the Anne arc, and then we're moving into the Callus arc with this episode. So good stuff. Cool. Go ahead. Oh wait, no, we're not there yet. It's after all the episodes. So Duncan ends up back in Paris, of course. I don't know if this is like a visa thing. Like. Whatever this guy's name is, I think he's like a French model before he did this. Adrian Peterson, is that his name? Something like that. Anyway, but we always spent half a season in France. I don't know. Maybe they had some deal with the French government or something. It's delightful because so immediately we get picked up by Fritz. Fritz is his old friend. It's somebody. He showed up in like season 2. He's just like hanging out here in Paris. He's an Englishman, not British, English, which is very particular because again, he's English. Duncan is Scottish, right? So there's some issue there. Anyway, so they're good friends. Dude Meister has like crazy hair and he's always smoking a pipe. Like he kind of looks like one of the doctors. I don't know if he actually was one of the doctors, like from Doctor Who back when I guess people enjoyed it, but now it's terrible. I know I'm not a Doctor Who guy. I've literally watched like half of one episode and I was like boring. So that's me. Man, this lizard's gonna die. Sorry, this gecko just like crawled up on the hood of my car while I'm driving. Oh well, c'est la vie, such is life. Okay, so what was I gonna say? Oh, okay. So he picks him up. They jaw jack a little bit. The guy is like madly in love with Naomi, who's this girl he works with, and apparently he's now like a teacher at like a cooking college or whatever, and she is like another teacher there or something. And so they get into they talk about Anne, and they talk about why Duncan doesn't really want to get into it, but they kind of talk about how Duncan didn't want to tell her the truth that he died, and so now he had to like flee over here and hang out for a while, and yada 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 yada. And then they get into like this Fritz guy is like, oh no, Naomi's the one, blah blah blah, like I'm in love. I haven't told her yet either though. Wah, wah, wah. We find out that Fritz was he's been kind of a ladies' man throughout the years. Like that comes up very specifically in terms of the backstory. So we go back to Verona, like Venice. We could pretty much go back to like the merchant princes of northern Italy era. And so Duncan's been hired by one of the princes to find out, because someone sent like a love letter to his daughter, and one of the most important things to this guy is like her virtue, which, okay, sure, that's not like I get it, but I don't know, it's not really like an Italian thing to give a fuck about virtue. But anyway, so Duncan heads off, and eventually he like tracks the princess, and then she like sneaks off, starts smooching with Fritz. This is before Duncan and him meet. So then they meet, and so then they jaw jack for a little bit, and then they send her away so they can duel, and they start dueling, and then some like guard of the city, because these were all city states back then, is like, "Oi!" He's like, "What the fuck you guys doing? It's against the law to duel inside the city." And they're like, "What?" And he points at this like thing written on the wall. And they're like, "Oh yeah." And then they're about to duel again. And he's like, "I will come down there with all the guards, and you will spend the rest of your life in prison if you don't get the fuck out of here and stop doing that." And they're like, "All right, well you cut it out." And then they both like realize at that point that neither of them can read. Oh goodness, Italian specifically, I would assume. But probably, it sounds like they can't read or write English either, which makes sense because they're like old-timey guys and they're just like, they just go around and like smooch and like fight. So like, who needs to read? Anyway, so then a bit later on, they meet up again and they have like an agreement that Fritz is not going to chase after the princess anymore, and Duncan's like, appreciate it. And then we find out that she is fucking Fritz, and so Duncan goes to like find out. He's like, hey bro, I thought we were cool, like the fuck. And he's like, what? I didn't approach her, she approached me. And he's like, you could have said no. And he's like, anyway, and then he's like, oh hey, by the way, she wasn't a virgin, so like I wasn't the one who took her like purity away or her virtue away or whatever. And Duncan's like, what? Like, how do you know that? And he's like, bro. Oh, fair. Anyway, so then he's like dragging him back to be like, I don't know, to put to trial or whatever, and the princess is freaking out. And then this dude Meister, like the counselor for the prince, like comes over and he's like, he needs to have his head cut off. That's what the prince wants. He wants his head on a plate. And Duncan's like, hell no, I'm gonna duel this guy because he dishonored me and the princess. And they're like, all right, fair enough. And so then they duel, and Duncan like stabs him in the heart, and then the counselor's like, take his head. And Duncan's like, fuck you, like that's ridiculous, this guy fought honorably, we're not gonna cut off his head like some coward or run away. And then the counselor's like, oh yeah? And Duncan like pulls out his swords. He's like, yeah, motherfucker, get out of here. And he's like, all right, fine. It's badass. And so he leaves, and then Duncan hangs out for a while, and Fritz wakes up and he's like, oh, you didn't take my head. And he's like, nah man, I'm not about that life, I'm the honorable guy. And so it's like, and then Duncan's like, all right, we'll catch you later. And Fritz is like, where you going? And he's like, to read, I'm gonna learn how to read and write. And he's like, all right, I'll come with you. And so then they become best friends forever. Well, not forever. Okay, so then back to modern era. They get like, while they're driving back to like the barge, and Maurice, our favorite Frenchman, they get like ran off the road by, and I felt like that never got like resolved. It was just like they got like ran off the road, and it was like, oh well, like okay. Maurice has like fixed up the barge and gotten it back because I think he sold it, but then Maurice like went and bought it and like from like a tow yard. I don't know. There's like a conversation about like fixing a battery or the engine or something and bringing it back. So that's nice. So they hang out there, and then he goes and meets Naomi, and there's this scumbag who's like trying to force himself on Naomi, Fritz's girlfriend. And she's like, no, I'm good. And he's like, no, you're not. It's the old English's fault. If it wasn't for him, you would be with me. And she's like, absolutely not. I would never be with you. I have no interest in you whatsoever. And he's like, we'll see about that. And then that's when Fritz and Duncan come up, and then they start fighting, and Duncan has to separate them. And then later on, Fritz is like hanging out with Naomi, and the other guy like shows up with like a gun, and Fritz is like, you're really gonna shoot me, motherfucker? Like, get the fuck out of here. And so he goes up and like takes the gun out of his hand and like empties it, and then like threatens to shoot him, and then shoots the ground, and is like, get the fuck out of here, you crazy lunatic. Meanwhile, we find and when that guy runs off, he runs into Callus. That's right, he's followed Duncan MacLeod all the way out to France so he can fuck with him some more because he's an asshole. But then Fritz reveals to Duncan that like he needs like his credentials changed in like the system, and so Duncan, since apparently he's a hacker as well, he's able to like break in. They break into the school where he teaches, and then he goes into like his credentialing file or something, and is able to like change it, all this stuff. And then at some point, Fritz reveals that like he's changing it partially so he can like seduce Naomi better or something. Like, I didn't catch exactly what it was. It was something where Duncan's like, wait, you want me to add what? And he's like this. And it's like, why do you need that? Like, you didn't need that to be like a professor at the school. And then Fritz is like, well, and then Duncan's like, do it yourself. And then Fritz is an idiot when it comes to computers. So he's like, I don't know how. And then Duncan finally does it for him. And they head off on their merry way. Meanwhile, after that occurs, Callus and the scumbag come in, and then they break into the system, and then they change a bunch of stuff. And then Callus calls Fritz and is like, oh ho ho, something, your life's gonna be ruined, tee hee hee, and like hangs up the phone. And then so Fritz goes over to the computer play, like the school, and he's like, these people like easily just like break in. There's like a security guard around that shows up at some point. But then Fritz, he goes to like change everything, and he's like, oh no, and he's like, what did you do, you asshole, to the guy. And the guy's just like sitting there in a chair for some fucking reason. And instead of being like a smart person and walking in and being like, this is a trap, I'm leaving, and like meandering out of there, he shakes him, and the guy falls down because he's dead. Oh no. And then Naomi comes in while he's trying to fix his credentialing because like, oh well, say Livy. And then she's like, what are you doing? And he's like, what are you doing here? And she's like, oh, so-and-so called me and told me you were here. And he's like, and then she said a body. He's like, I didn't kill him. And she's like, what? And then the police like storm in. Again, it's like the most obvious trap in the whole world. Fritz, you're an idiot. And so he runs and like jumps out of the building, and then he goes to hide with Duncan, but then the police like come to see Duncan because somehow they know that they're friends or whatever. And so Fritz like sneaks out the back door and heads to like the basement of the Bastille to meet up with Duncan. And then so Duncan like goes to meet with him, but then guess who's there? Dun dun dun, Callus. And so Callus and Fritz fight, and Callus wins because otherwise that would be a short arc. And then Duncan goes up, he's like, all right, man, I want to finish this fucking thing right now. Let's do this. And then Callus is like, I don't think so. And he like hits like a pipe, which blows a bunch of gas, and then like disappears into the fog. And then later on, at some point Richie shows up because he's like motocross racing or something, or motorcycle racing, and he like won the Long Beach Open or something, and now he's in Paris because there's like another race here. And so they have a short conversation about him like just living his best life and being like kind of famous, but like being careful with being famous since he can't die and he's immortal. And so but then Duncan's like, yeah, it's fine. I mean, you got plenty, you got like 10-15 years, and then you're gonna like disappear into the woodwork. Anyway, so then at the very end of the episode, Duncan and Richie are just kind of sitting around kind of mourning the loss of Fritz, who's now dead. And then Maurice comes in and he's like, oh, let's celebrate, blah, 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 blah. And Richie's like, not right now. And Maurice is like, oh, my bad. And that wraps up episode 15. This next episode really amps up like the shit that's going on. Not in terms of like the threat value necessarily, but definitely of just like there's like 3 storylines going on, which normally there's like 1 with like some background stuff. There's like a secondary story, and then there's like a whole nother like A plot going on over here, right? Or a C plot or whatever. I don't know. I don't know movie terms, even though I went to film school. But so what we have, let's see how to break it up. Okay, so we're still dealing with Callus, of course. So we get some backstory, because a couple episodes ago we saw that he has like a scar in his throat, and he seems to be very angry at Duncan about it, but we didn't get information in that episode or the episode with Fritz. So now we're on to like the 3rd episode of the Callus arc, and we finally get some information.
So back in the 1920s, Duncan is hooking up with this, like, what do they call him, flapper lady, who's like a singer, and then she wants to sing, like, she's singing like jazzy tunes, but she really wants to sing like operatic stuff, and Duncan just happens to know like so and so. I can't remember what alternative name he was using, but it's Callus, right? And he's like the greatest tenor in all the land or whatever. So he's still singing, right? That's like his whole shebang. Before it was like the singing aspect, and so he had a beautiful voice and everything. So we go and he introduces them, and then Callus is like, "Oh, all's forgiven. Don't worry about it." And Duncan has like a recall within a recall, because this is a recall or flashback or whatever of like the time when Callus, when they were in like the monastery. Callus is like, "I swear I'll get my revenge on you," something, something, something. Callus is like, "Oh, no, man. I mean, we're just old. And like, I said a lot of angry things, but I got over it. I'm doing great now. So thanks to you for helping me get out of there." And so he sings with this lady. She's very good. He starts kind of like flirting with her, and Duncan gets a little jealous, and they have a conversation about that. And then Duncan has like a whole situation set up for her, because I think they're supposed to be in Paris, but then they're going to go back to like America and go to like some... She's gonna like sing at Carnegie Hall or something. I don't remember. Anyway, there's like a whole thing, and so this other guy, Callus, whoever he's pretending to be, wants her to stay with him, and so she goes back to like talk to him, and they have like a back and forth about that, and she's kind of concerned, and then Callus like loses it, and he's like, "I will destroy Duncan MacLeod, and I will kill you," blah 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 blah, and then like Duncan rolls in, and then they fight, and then at some point he gets like stabbed in the neck, and for some reason it like never heals, which is weird because immortals and stuff. And like it's not like Duncan takes off his shirt to show his manly chest, and it's like full of like sword holes and shit, which he's been stabbed at least like 5 times that we've seen, if not more. So that's kind of weird. I don't know if it's like a cold iron thing, or I felt like there was no explanation about exactly why, but for some reason it like scarred his throat permanently. Acid? I don't know, man. Like. And so that's how he got his scar. That's why he has like an angry voice and not like a good like singing voice. And it's like part 2 of why he will like swear vengeance on Duncan MacLeod and destroy him forever. All right, so that's that. Then the other kind of like B plot / C plot is Richie. Richie's got like, it's like a whole nother episode. Like it's like very jarring because it's one of those things where usually like the A plot and B plot in like TV shows or whatever, they like come together, right? So you have like the flashbacks, which are kind of like just part of the A plot to me, if I'm completely honest. They're not usually, but oftentimes they're like a whole separate story that like ties into like the reason why so-and-so is like friends with Duncan or enemies with Duncan, or like gives you some like background on like his character. Like it's all done very well, right? To kind of like build like, oh, this guy's an immortal, and like he learned this lesson like in 1825, right? Stuff like that. But this Richie Ryan story is just like totally like, so we see this guy like racing motorcycles, and he's get into like a fight with like his owner or whatever, or the owner of like his bike or something, because that's how racing works. Like there's the owners who own like the vehicles, and then they hire racers to like race them, and they get all the prestige, and then yada yada, right? Sports stuff. So this guy's like getting old, and then Richie shows up right after like they get into an argument, and is like, "Hey, let me join your team. I took 3rd place in Long Beach," and blah blah blah. And the guy's like, "Oh, this is petty. This is not Long Beach." And so he just grabs one of the motorcycles and like races around the track, and then the guy times him, and is like, "Oh, he's very good." And so he's like, "All right, you can take that guy's bike." And the guy's like, "What about me?" And he's like, "I told you to take your fucking watch." Like, I don't know the deal with the watches. It comes up a couple times. And so he sends him on his way. And then the other guy on like the racing team is like, "Oh, Richie, let me show you petty," or whatever. And so they go and like hang out and they race and talk about girls. And then the old drunk guy like comes back, and he's all mad and drunk. And so he races, and then he gets like injured because he's like, it's like late, and he's drunk, and he's trying to ride a bike really fast. And Richie kind of feels bad about that. And then they're like at the actual race, and there's like a whole thing where like the guy who got kicked off the team is like arguing with like the guy who stayed on the team, who like befriends Richie about how he's like a backstabber and how they're supposed to work together because they're on the same team, but the guy's like too selfish, right? And it's like importance of things to come, obviously, because in like their final, or in like the final race of the episode, the guy like betrays Richie and like drives him off the track or something, and then like mocks him after Richie like almost crashes. Essentially, it doesn't like crash, but like kind of rides off the track, and is like, "Oh, something, fuck you," and Richie's like, "Fuck you," and then that's into that story. Yep. so that has nothing to do with anything else that's going on. Okay, so the main story is Duncan is like trying to track down Callus, and then Callus is like killing. He like finds a guy who's been following him, drags him into his like hidey hole, and like tortures him. And he finds out he's a watcher. And he's like, "The fuck's a watcher?" And he's like, "We watch you and stuff." And he's like, "Do you know Duck McCloud?" And he's like, "I do." And he's like, "Interesting. Do you know Mythos?" And he's like, "Oh, Mythos." And it's like, who the fuck is this Mythos character? And then so that guy gets killed, and then there's like he goes and assaults like another guy who works at like a bookstore. He's like a librarian or something, and he asks about the Mythos Chronicles, which is like a whole web miniseries that we'll get to at some point. I can't remember when it's slotted. It might be after Raven, which is like the series starring Amanda after this main Highlander series, which is 6 seasons, right? So it may be like months from now when we get to that, but it's there, and we'll talk about it. So, because Mythos plays like a kind of, he's like an on again, off again guy for a bit here. Okay, so Mythos is the oldest immortal, and he is like a myth, like Adam and Eve, I guess. I don't know. Like the Garden of Eden. That's how when Duncan calls Joe out on it, he's like, wait a second, I found this thing about this. So when I found the librarian, and he was dead, but then he was writing and he wrote M.E. And then Joe's like, holy fuck, I gotta call Adam, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, I gotta go. And Duncan's like, the fuck is going on? And he's like, it's Mythos. And he's like, Mythos is a myth, motherfucker. And he's like, no, he's not. And it's like, so he's like a 5,000-year-old immortal. He's been around since the very beginning, like, and apparently he keeps like this very intricate like journal over like the last 5,000 years called the Mythos Chronicles. And he started it like when he made his first like kill as an immortal. And again, that was like 5,000 years ago, and so he may be even older than that. Right? He's like, I don't know. But he's been kind of just like fucking around doing the Watcher thing. Like he's like the Watcher for himself, right? So he can just like make shit up and just go and like live his life, and like, you know, it's like very clever, to be completely honest. But he hasn't had like a sword fight in like 200 years, and so Duncan finally like tracks him down before Callus does, and is like, we need to get you out of here, I need to protect you, like you're like something, and Mythos is like, oh no, I can take care of myself, I've been fighting a long time, big guy. And he's like, no, you don't understand, Callus is like super angry and shit, and very good. And he's like, we'll see about that. And so Callus ends up does track down Mythos, and they get into a sword fight, and then Callus like almost cuts his head off, but then Mythos and him like fall into the river, and then Mythos like sneaks out of there. And then Duncan finds him like later on, he's like reading some of his like journal or whatever. And Mythos just immediately attacks Duncan, and Duncan's like, the fuck's going on? So Duncan beats him up and is about to cut off his head, but then he doesn't because it's Duncan and he's full of honor, Japanese honor and stuff. And so he's like, the fuck are you doing? And he's like, there can be only one. And he's like, yeah, I know that shit, but why are you attacking me? Like, what the fuck's going on here? And he's like, no, seriously, there can be only one. And like, I can't beat Mythos, and I don't know if you can beat I can't beat Callus, and I don't know if you can beat Callus, but together we definitely can. So take my head. And then Duncan's like, why don't you just take my head? Like, that shit doesn't make any sense. We'll be fine. I'll fight Callus and like whatever. And he's like, no, something. He's like, look, motherfucker, just let it be. All right. So then later on, Callus like breaks back in because he broke into his apartment before. He like breaks. He's like waiting around at quote unquote like Adam's apartment, which is Mythos. Adam is Mythos. Adam's like his Watcher name. Get it? Adam and Eve. Haha, get it? He's the oldest. Anyway, so what was I at? Oh, so then Callus like feels the presence, and he's like, aha, I have tracked you down, Mythos, come fight me and die. And then Duncan's like, nah, bitch, it's me. And so then they start fighting, and they end up like out on the street, and then the police roll up, and they're like, what? And then the police are like, you're under arrest for like the death of the Watcher guy. And he's like, you don't have any evidence against me. And then Mythos like rolls in, and he's like, that's the guy, you got him, good job, French law, Napoleonic law. And then Mythos is like, I'll get out of here eventually. And they're like, bye. And then Mythos just like grabs his shit and like disappears into the other, because Duncan we find that out because there's like a commercial break, and then afterwards Duncan's talking to Joe on the phone. And he's like, yeah, man, Adam was Mythos the whole time. And Joe's like, holy shit, man, that guy tricked the shit out of us. That was amazing. And it's like, yep. Anyway, what happened to him? And it's like, I don't know, he disappeared. Like, no one's seen him. He's like, he's ghosted again. Like, that's Mythos for you. And during the episode, Mythos and Duncan have a couple conversations about, like, survival, and, like, it's more important to live and, like, keep your head than it is to, like, get revenge or fight or do any of this bullshit. So that's a good lesson. And then, you know, at the end, Duncan just kind of, like, thinks about all the things Mythos said to him, which wraps up episode 15, I think. All right, so the next episode focuses heavily on another Scottish Yes, she's like a Celtic immortal named Cerduin. So we get this guy, and he's at dinner with his wife, and they're kind of getting into an argument about going to Spain and how she likes being in Paris and all their friends there. And that more opportunities will come later, and then he like throws his napkin onto the table and is like, maybe for you, not all of us can live forever. And it's like, oh, okay, she's immortal. So then he gets up, and then we switch over to like these street punks, and they're just talking about like there's like this street punk boss, Chris. What was this guy's name? Anyway, and he's like giving a hard time to some fucking like street urchin kid about how like he didn't bring in enough money or something. Anyway, so I'm trying to remember if I ever got the gang leader. I didn't write it down, so it must not have been important. Okay, so then the guy who stormed out of the restaurant, like, he kind of walks by them. They like mug him, so he gives them his wallet, and they're like, "Give me your watch," and he's like, "No," and so they shoot him. And it's around that point that Cerduin has like seen what's going on, and so she rushes over, and she's like, "No, no, no!" And then they shoot her too. And then there's like little street urchin who they were like bartering with before, and he like watches her die and like gets freaked out and runs off. Okay, then we switch over to Richie. So Maurice and Duncan are watching Richie do his like motorcycle racing stuff, and they talk about that a little bit. And then right as Duncan's like about to leave, he gets like robbed by like the street urchin guy, and so he like grabs him, takes his wallet, and takes the kid's wallets back, or he takes his wallet back and then takes the kid's wallet as like revenge or whatever. And then the kid is like, "Give me a ride," and Duncan's like, "All right, whatever." So he does. Meanwhile, the immortal lady, Cerduin, she is like putting on like old Celtic face paint and like tattoo paint and stuff, and pulling her hair back and stuff. And then we get a flashback. And so the flashback deals with she was like one of these like Celts who fought against the Romans. So she's been alive for like 1,000 years. And then for more than 1,000 years, jeez. So she's old as shit. Anyway, so then and then she's married to like this guy, and then they go off to war to fight the Romans. And then I think this one, it seems like this is when she becomes an immortal the first time, because then she wakes up and then kills the shit out of all the Romans. And then we get like another flashback later on, and it's Duncan with like the Prince James, I want to say, I can't remember. Anyway, the Scottish prince who's like where they're trying to fight the English back so that they don't take over Scotland and all that stuff. And so they meet up and have like a conversation. They like meet like Duncan and this chick, and then like they like they save the prince, and then Duncan goes to like fight, and then they have a conversation, and she's like, you don't have to just keep fighting, like sometimes it can feel bad to like do things, even though, which is a turnabout, because at the same time she is getting revenge on this gang. Like she takes her sword and just goes and kills the shit out of them, and then Duncan finds out because the little kid like runs off and bumps into him again and mentions it, and so him and Richie have like a conversation about like what she's doing. And so he goes off to like talk to her about it, and she's like, "I gotta get revenge, he was my husband, blah blah blah." And then they get into like a whole conversation about love, and the whole thing is like really pushing real hard for Duncan to eventually reach back out and tell Anne how he really feels. Excuse me. And to like, because he like is still thinking about her, still in love with her, but he's still concerned about all the Tessa stuff, right? And we get some like flashbacks about all that stuff, and like about him and Tessa, and about talking about stuff. And then and so he decides, he talks to Richie and is like, "I need to go stop her so she doesn't keep doing this, and at the same time I'm gonna have to like stop her, right?" So he goes off, and at some point they like confront each other, and he's finally able to get her to like stop, because it's not going to make anything better. It's not going to bring her husband back, whatever. And then she talks about how this is why he doesn't want to have like another girlfriend who's immortal. And she's like, "They're not children, Duncan, like they're adults and they can make their own decisions. Like maybe you should give her a chance, like this other girl that you're clearly into." And so finally Duncan is like, "All right, fine." At some point in this episode also, Richie is like during his bike race, he gets like real mad because like this other guy and like his team keeps like bumping into him or like cutting him off and stuff. And so they get into it again in this race, and then they both like fly off the track and get set on fire. They both like die, right? Of course Richie doesn't die, but that's like the end of his like racing career and the end of his like time in France. So he shows back up at the barge, all naked and stuff, and then Duncan at the same time is like talking to Maurice about like how sad he is that Richie's gone, and he's like, "Oh, Maurice, I just need a mortal alone. Get out of here." And, so and that's when Richie comes, and then the other lady comes, and they have a conversation. So finally, Duncan is like, "All right, fine." So he gets Joe to invite Anne over to like his bar, and then he tries to like kind of like ease her into the concept, and then I got you a ticket to France. Why'd you give me a ticket to France? Oh, you'll see. And then someone calls, and it's Duncan, and she's like, Duncan. And so then she heads over to France, and that wraps up that episode. So that she gets to France in the beginning of the next episode. Episode 18 deals a lot with Anne learning about immortals and kind of dealing with all that crazy nonsense, while also at the same time dealing with Richie having to like disappear, right? Like get the fuck out of the country. And like he's like at a hotel like out in the country, and when he's like coming to see Duncan at like the barge, you know, because he's like his dad essentially, so he doesn't want to like cut ties too much. Duncan's like, man, you got to run, you got to go back to the States, you got to like go hide out for like a few decades, and like it is what it is, right? And so this might actually be the end of Richie. I don't remember because I watched a lot of these episodes like out of order. I used to own like the entire 6th season on DVD, but I don't know if I ever sat down and like watched it all in order like I did now. Anyway, so where were we? Oh, okay. So Richie he gets like seen by somebody who's like recognizes him, and he's like, oh fuck, I gotta go. Meanwhile, so Duncan goes to the airport to pick up Anne, and he runs into another immortal, Christoph. So he runs into Chris. So Chris is, yeah, that's where I got Chris from. So Christoph's an old Cossack, like an old Russian horseman who lived on the steppes. And him and Duncan met a long time ago when Duncan was just like out traveling around like the steppes, probably after he got done in like Mongolia. And then he like attacked, or this Cossack guy that worked for Christoph, or was in his like clan or whatever, attacked him, and Duncan like dehorsed him and then like taunted him, and the guy's like, oh, Cossack never gets knocked off his horse, you should come join us and be warriors. So they go and they beat Christoph, and they just do like Russian shit for a little bit. But at some point Christoph wants to like go to these farmers and like drive them off the land, and they're like, you know, just peasant farmers, and Duncan's like real concerned, but he's like, no, this is the Christoph way, it's like for Russia, these people are invading our land, they need to get the fuck off. And so Duncan like doesn't agree, and so Christoph goes off, and that's like his modus operandi. Anyway, so who's Chris? So Duncan he runs into this Christoph guy. I think he runs into him at the airport, and they chit chat for a little bit. No, hold on. No, he runs into some other guy who's talking about like his fiance or some bullshit or whatever. I don't know. He's just talking to some random guy. And then Anne, she's coming off the plane, this girl like collapses, and since she's a doctor, she like takes care of that. And so then she runs off to the hospital with her, and Duncan like follows, right? And we find out that she had like a heroin balloon in her belly or whatever that leaked a little bit, so she like got an overdose of heroin. So they're able to save her because you use some like naloxone, and ease her out of that. So we find out that she is the like Christoph's girlfriend or whatever, because in the modern day he's like running like a gang in Paris that like sells drugs and does other stuff like that as part of like the Russian mafia or whatever. And so we spend a bit of the episode, so like I said, we spend a little with Richie doing this thing. We do a bit with Anne, just kind of like learning about immortals, talking about it, coming to terms with it, being like, I want to be with you, and everything, and like feeling good about everything that's going on. And then there's like some back and forth. Well, Christoph's like, look, man, I will fuck up your girlfriend if you don't leave my girlfriend alone, or get your girlfriend to like lay off, so that I can get my girlfriend back and like either murder her or get her out of like the police custody or whatever, so that it doesn't ruin my operations or whatever. And after back and forth, like Duncan decides he needs to like take care of this Christoph situation, but at the same time he's kind of like, hey, you just need to get out of here, and then just let this be. It is what it is. Like, this woman is like engaged with like the Russian mafia, like she's not a child. But at some juncture, Richie he's like trying to get out of town, and he gets in like a cab that like I guess the Russian mafia owns, or like they grab him up, and then he calls Duncan. He's like, oh, I got your friend, you better come over. You gotta either kill this lady, you gotta kill Tasha, or I'm gonna cut off the head of your friend here. And so Duncan's like, I gotta sneak over there and go. So get Tasha. He tells Anne to like take care of Tasha and make sure she like confesses or whatever, please custody. So then Duncan pulls his solid snake maneuver where he like, hops down from like ledges and like incapacitates like Kristoff's like entire operation. And then at some point, Kristoff like figures it out that he's like coming and he's about to cut Richie's head off, and Richie's like, do it. So as soon as you like kind of like get through the quickening, Duncan come over here and he can cut your head off. And the guy's like, fuck. And so he tries to like make a break for it, but then Richie's able to like escape. And then he chases down Kristoff, and Duncan meanwhile is still doing like solid snake shit. And so Richie eventually catches up with Kristoff and he's like, ta-da. And so they fight and you're like, awesome, Richie finally fucking gets to fight somebody. And then it's very ambiguous. Like so they fight, and then it gets to a point where they're both like about to make like their final like samurai swing or ninja swing, like Ninja Gaiden, and then it like goes to Duncan, and Duncan like looks out the window, and there's like choo like the lightning, and he's like, huh? And so then he kind of rushes over, and then Richie comes walking out, and he's like, hey man, don't worry about it, I took care of it. And it's like, hell yeah, Richie. But at this point we say like our final farewell, or Duncan supposedly says his final farewell to Richie. They like hug it out. He gives like Anne like a kiss goodbye on the cheek. And then he's going to like move on and kind of keep a low profile for a few decades, and then maybe track down Duncan again in some future date, and they can be like friends again, as immortals do. And so it's a sweet send off to Richie, and then Anne and Duncan just get back to like fucking and stuff. So that's fun. Episode 19 is pretty intense. It deals. So Anne is acting kind of like funny all of a sudden. So Duncan's trying to get like, cute with her or like flirty with her or like kissy, and she keeps being like, and I'm like, bro, she's on her period. Like fucking bitches, am I right? So, so he's kind of like, what's going on with this? And he gets into it with her later. But for now, the episode actually starts off, there's like a guy, like a priest conducting services at a church. And then like this guy like runs in and he's like, you got to help me. There's something. And then this guy comes in and the priest is like, oh, you're alive. And the guy's like, ta-da. And so this priest goes and tracks down Duncan, because this guy that like showed up, he hasn't seen this guy since like World War II. And he supposedly is dead, so now he's like back from the grave, and he's like, he must be one of your people. And so we find out with a flashback that this kid this priest during World War II was like a little kid, and he was working at like a monastery, but he was also the monastery was helping with like the resistant forces in France, I'm assuming, yeah. And that this Nazi guy who's an immortal kept coming over here and like causing like stirring the pot or whatever, and that Duncan was a member of, he's an immortal, and he was like also helping out with the resistance, and so they have some back and forth. And then at some point, Duncan is on like a raid of the Nazis or the Germans at the time. I mean, they were the National Socialist political party, but no one like really called them Nazis at the time. They called them the Germans or the Krauts. So he gets shot and killed, right? But he's immortal, obviously, and like everyone else. No one sees it except for the little kid who sees him like wake up, and he makes the kid like promise to never tell anybody that like he can't die, essentially. And the guy like takes it all the way till now, right? And so that's how he knows. And so then they chit chat about that a little bit. And so Duncan goes to track down the white supremacist guy. Or he's a Nazi now. He's like running like a white supremacist newspaper or something, and he finds him in like his little bar, and they go back and forth. And the guy's like, "What?" I'm like, "Yeah, I was a member of the Nazi party. Like, whatever." Like that shit's long over. I'm not doing anything illegal. I literally, and he's like, "You still fucking doing this like white supremacy shit?" And the guy's like, "Whatever. It's what I want to do, so I'm gonna do it. I'm not doing anything illegal. I'm not causing any problems. Like, it is what it is." And Duncan's like, "That's fair." And he's like, "Who told you about me being over here?" And it's like, "Was it that priest guy?" Blah blah blah. And it's and Duncan's like gives him a look, and he's like, "You might want to ask him why he's so concerned that I'm going to do something to him." And Duncan's like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "Go ask him." And so Duncan does. So he heads back over to the church to talk to the priest, and the priest reveals that he actually killed this guy and then like threw him into the ocean. Wowzers. But how that happened again, because he's like a little orphan kid who's living at this monastery or whatever. So this guy leading his like troop of like German soldiers like rolled into the monastery and is like, "Tell us where the rebels are. We're gonna, and the guy's like, "Kill me if you must. Like, I'm not gonna tell you anything. Like, I know I did what's right with God." And he's like, "All right, we're not gonna kill you. We're gonna start killing everybody else. We're gonna kill that guy and that guy and that guy and that guy." And then the kid who's like they were just working in like the garden when the Germans showed up. He has like a shovel, and he like stabs the guy in the back with it. He's like, no, and he like hits him, and then when he screams and like fires a gun in the air, all these like rebels or these like French resistance fighters are just like out and about like around the monastery, and so they just like all pop up and start they kill the shit out of the Germans, and then the priest is like, oh no, and then the kid's like freaking out because he killed somebody. He's like, I killed him, I didn't mean to kill him, I just and it's like, all right, well, you gotta, and he tells like this older orphan boy that is like hanging out at the monastery, like, hey, you need to help him like like fix this problem and like clean this place up so like no one comes over and is like, hey, where the fuck's this whole troop of like German soldiers? And so what they do is they like wrap him up and then just like throw him into the river, I guess, or the ocean or whatever. And so while they're trying to throw this guy in, obviously he's immortal, so he's like starting to like wake up, and they freak out, and they're just like, throw him in, they'll take care of it. So they throw him in there, and I guess he spent like 40 years at the bottom of the ocean, just like chilling, like like dying and waking up again or whatever. And then he finally got out, and so he's pissed. At this juncture, the priest feels like he needs to warn like his homie, who is, and there's a lot of back and forth conversation with like Anne and Duncan about how maybe they need to go back to the U.S. and get out of here because it's kind of crazy, and issues with that and whatnot. And then at some point she reveals that the reason she's acting like such a cunt is because dun dun dun, she's pregnant. What? So what happened is after Duncan like faked his death, essentially, she was like in mourning, and so like one of her like quote unquote friends she fucked this guy without protection, because that's what you do when you're mourning the loss of like your lover. And so she got knocked up first try. That guy's a king. And so then they talk about like Duncan raising the child because she's going to have the child because abortion is evil. And so then he has to like think about it, and then he comes back, he's like, he thinks about Tessa and how she always wanted a kid, but she couldn't have a kid with Duncan, and then she died. The one episode where she like helped protect that little girl, and how it made her like kind of sad that she's never going to be able to have a kid, but she loves Duncan so much. And so he's like, you know what, maybe this can work, like I can help raise this kid as like my son and stuff, and we'll kind of figure it out. And they go back and forth about his like dangerous lifestyle and how like any moment he could die. And she's like, I don't care, any moment I get hit by a bus, like things happen. And he's like, that's a good point. She has a real change of heart on that at the end of the episode. Don't you fret. So then somehow she gets like embroiled with like the priest and everything else that's going on. He goes and tells the older orphan kid from like back in the day, who's now running like, he's like a businessman and he's not like the most pious person around. And so he gets concerned, and then he's like, I don't believe you. There's no way Duncan's still alive. This other guy's still alive. And so he brings him over to meet Duncan, and he's like, I don't believe this. And then, finally Duncan's like, yep, that's me. I'm immortal, blah, blah, blah. And the guy's like, holy shit. Like crazy. So, but then he gets like killed by Kristoff pretty quickly after that point. And then the priest finds that out, and he's like freaking out. And then Duncan's like, hey, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to hunt this motherfucker down, and I'm going to kill him before he can kill you. And Anne's going to stay with you here in the church. And the church is holy ground, and immortals cannot kill in holy ground. I guess the rules is not just they can't kill immortals, they can't kill anybody. Like it's like holy ground. So they will not kill immortals, and they will not kill mortals on holy ground. So and Kristoff's going to respect that. And so then Duncan goes to like track him down. He goes and like tortures some of his, he goes and like solid snakes some of his like minions, and like ties them up and like tortures them so he can get information. And finally one of them's like, he's at the church, so he races back to the church. Meanwhile, Kristoff comes into the church, and he's got a gun, and he's like threatening to shoot the priest and shoot the girl and all this stuff. And it's like, you should run, get out of the church. And Anne's like, no, Duncan said that like you can't leave the church, something. And so they go back and forth about this. And finally the priest like freaks out and like runs outside the church, and so the guy can like track him down and like kill him. And then he like knocks over like Anne, and so there's like concern about the baby and all that stuff. Finally Duncan comes and like rescues her, and then kills the shit out of this guy through a sword fight. I mean, he's got to be pretty rusty after like 40 years of just like living in the ocean like a fucking mermaid. Anyway, and so then so to wrap up the episode, Anne's like, I'm going home. And Duncan's like, oh, good. Yeah, I think that's a good idea. And she's like, no, I'm going home. We can't be together. And Duncan's like, what? I thought we talked about this. You get hit by a bus any day. And she's like, I can't deal with this. It's too stressful. I can't imagine you going out and like dealing with all this crazy shit. And like, I just can't do it. We're done. And then they cry it out and hug. That wraps up the episode. So Anne came back for like a little bit. Pretty much just like 2 episodes. And c'est la vie, I guess. She's gone again. Maybe she'll come back. But she's gone for now. Episode 20 goes hard and it goes dark real fast. So we start off with a prostitute named Simone, who it looks like her bike broke down, and some ambulance guys, it looks like, or some dudes transporting some stuff. They roll up to stop to be like, oh, hey, you okay? And she's like, oh, yeah, I need some help fixing my bike. And they're like, oh, we don't have time. We got to deliver this thing. and she's like, oh, maybe you could give me a ride, and they're like, oh, maybe, and then this guy pops up with a gun, and it's like, ta-da, and then she pulls out a gun, so they take him out, they steal this painting thing, and or this sketch or whatever, this like artistic thing that's being transferred to a different place, and then the guy shoots both of them, and then she gets kind of mad because it's like, you weren't supposed to hurt anyone, and he's like, YOLO. The next day or so, Duncan is meeting with like another art collector, because he's into antiques and stuff, so it's like one of his antique buddies, and they're talking about this sketch that got taken away and how it's like a super big deal and how these people want like a 10,000, not dollar, whatever it is in Paris, francs? No, I think that's Germany. Maybe it is Paris. Anyway, he wants 100,000 whatever dollars they use in Paris before the Eurozone took over. And so he's going to give it to him, but then Duncan's like, no, let me go. It'll be better if I go, yada, yada, yada. Meanwhile, or like a bit later on, so he's going to go like the next day. Later on that day, Maurice wants him to come by like his restaurant. And so he goes by, and Maurice introduces him to his niece, who is Simone. Oh, it's the prostitute who robbed the people. Whoa. And then Maurice is trying to help Duncan get over Anne, who pieced out in the last episode, and so he introduces him to his niece, and is like, oh, something, she's so beautiful, isn't she, blah, 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 and she wants, like, nothing to do with him, and he's just like, okay, thanks, Maurice, you're a pal. Okay, so the next day, he goes to like, deliver the goods, and it's dun-dun-dun, Maurice, or not Maurice, sorry, Simone puts a gun to the back of his head and is like, give me the money and we'll deliver the painting tomorrow or whatever. And he's like, I don't think so. And he's like, Simone? And she's like, what? Turn your head around. And he's like, no. And so he takes the gun out of her hand and then drags her to meet up with the guy. And I can't remember the guy's name. I can't remember his name, but blonde guy. And then blonde guy is dun dun dun. He's an immortal, of course, you idiots. And so when Duncan sees him, we get a flashback. And so Duncan's like at a bank, and he's at like a Paris bank, and he's like, oh hey, my great grandfather like left some money here. I was just trying to see like what if it's still around and if interest. And the guy looks it up, and it's like $1,000,000 franc, and it's like 1930, and it's like holy shit. Like that'd be so much goddamn money. And Duncan's like, yes. I mean, this is like establishes for the first time that Duncan is like rolling in money. Like unlimited funds, which is why he can just fuck off to Paris whenever he fucking wants and like open businesses and shut them and whatnot. So good for him. Anyway, and then there's a bank robbery, and the bank robbery is by dun 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 2 immortals, including the blonde guy, but also a brown-haired guy who is like his mentor, the blonde guy's mentor. So when they get in there, Duncan like walks up to the clearly older guy and is like, we could have a problem here. And the guy's like, look, man, this is just business. And Duncan's like, as long as you don't hurt anybody, you and me are good. And the guy's like, yeah, we're just here to steal money. But they're not just there to steal money. They shoot some lady on the way out. And so Duncan like goes and tracks them down at like an opium den later on. And then he gets the guy in the back and he fights him and kills him. And then the other guy comes out and Duncan's like, this is not between me and you, but if you want to do this, we can do this. And the guy is clearly green, and Duncan will clearly kill the shit out of him if he doesn't. So they agree not to fight. And this is like a situation that comes up later in the episode because him and Maurice have like a conversation about like wishing you could have done something in the past, and Duncan clearly should have killed this guy in the past because now he's still robbing people like 100 years later or whatever. That was like 1930, so 70, like 80 years later. Anyway, so back to the present. He like fires at Duncan, and then the dude and Simone like take off until the world they take off. Duncan then goes back to his like art friend and is like, hey man, don't call the police, I got this, I'm gonna take care of this, don't you worry. And so then Duncan goes and like does some investigating and eventually tracks down Simone to like the bordello that she works at, because she's not a prostitute, she's like I guess it is kind of a prostitute, I don't know what you would call it. Anyway, she works at this whorehouse, and when and then we go with her, and she shows up, and then I think his name is Frank. Anyway, blonde guy's there waiting for her, and so they like fuck, and then Duncan comes in, and he's like asking around for her, and they're like, oh, she's already the customer, and he's like, oh, that's good, I'm not looking for her, I'm looking for the customer. And then he sees the guy, and so then he chases the guy up to like the roof, and the guy has his sword, and Duncan's gonna like clearly kill the shit out of him because he's like this guy is like completely doesn't know how to fight with a sword like whatsoever. He like is barely functional because the guy who taught him did not teach him well. We get a lot of flashbacks as with him like grown up, and the thing implies heavily that the brown-haired guy who is the bank robber with him that Duncan killed, like he found him when he was a kid, and somehow he knew he was an immortal, and then he like took him in and taught him all the tricks of the trade, and then when he became like an adult like 10 years later, so when he was like in his early 20s, he like shot him and is like and when he shoots him, he's like, I'm gonna make you immortal, and shoots him, and then he like waits for him to get back up, and he's like, ta-da. And I'm like, wait, I thought, how, like how does he know he's immortal? Like, seriously, like how? Like, I didn't think that was a thing that people like knew, but I guess this guy knew somehow. Maybe because it's like when he found him like originally as a kid, he was getting beat up and then he like healed up quickly or something. I didn't think that like literally happened until like the immortal stuff, but maybe like figured it out. That's my only assumption. It doesn't explain it whatsoever, and I don't remember them ever talking about this being a thing that could possibly happen before. But clearly this guy did. Okay, so that's how he made him, and then they just like bank robbed and all this other stuff. They never really dealt with that. So since then, since Duncan let him go back in the opium den in like the 1930s, he has just continued to be like a guy or whatever. So the guy like approaches Duncan the next day and is like, hey man, I don't want to be a thief anymore, like maybe give me a job or whatever. And Duncan's like, we're not friends, bro, you gotta figure out your shit, just get like a job and start working your job and like figure shit out. And the guy's like, okay. A bit later on, Duncan, oh that's right, wait, hold on. That's right. Okay, so the way Duncan finds out her place is because Maurice gives him her address, and she like heads over there, and she wants to like flee the country because Duncan like is onto them, is going to call the police, and the guy's like, no, he's not going to call the police. Don't worry about it. Yada yada yada. Anyway, let me think. Okay, so then so then Simone visits Duncan after that incident. And he's like, hey, I can help you. And she's like, you don't understand how I grew up. And apparently, like, her mom and Maurice's wife, who were, like, sisters, like, died in a car wreck. And then her dad became, like, a real shitbag and became, like, she was, like, she was, like, 10, I think, and she was willing to do anything that he asked her to do, which includes, like, getting fucked by him because her mom wasn't around. Yup! I told you this episode got fucking dark. And so she was, like, sexually assaulted by, like, her father multiple times when she was young. And he's like, what about Maurice? And Maurice was, like, drunk for, like, 5 years. So this is why she's so fucked up now, is because her dad, like, raped her a bunch. After her mom died, like, Jesus, what a terrible life this poor girl had. And then Duncan's like, it's not too late to change your life around and do stuff. Like, Maurice and I can help you. Like, he loves you and he's here now. And she's like, I don't know. So instead of doing that, she goes back. Oh, and meanwhile, Maurice wants to go confront her about being like a prostitute. And so he heads off to her place. Well, the blonde guy's there, and he like cuts his hand with like a stiletto, and then Maurice like runs off, and so Maurice like shows up with like a bandaged hand, and he's like, what the fuck? And then after Simone leaves to go meet up with this guy and then fuck him again in her apartment, Maurice and Duncan have a conversation about the whole situation, and then Duncan realizes that this guy's still around, so they both go to Simone's apartment, and Simone at some point is like, I don't want to do this anymore, yada yada, I don't want to be a thief or whatever. And then he gets like super mad and he stabs her with the stiletto, killing her. And so Maurice and Duncan find her dead, and at this point Duncan's like, oh, shit, I should have killed this guy like so many times. Right, and so Maurice is like super distraught, and then Duncan's like, I'm going to take care of it, don't worry. And he's like, what are you going to do? He's like, I'm going to kill this motherfucker. And Maurice is like, very good. So he does. He's able to track him down by going to the whorehouse and finding out like some previous whore he was like whoring around with. And once he gets to that whorehouse, he's like there, and the guy like tries to run away, but then Duncan tracks him down, and then Duncan beats the shit out of him like almost immediately. And the guy's like, this isn't a battle, this is an execution. And Duncan's like, you had a better chance than fucking Simone did, and then cuts his head off. And then the episode wraps up with Maurice talking about the guy some more and Simone, and that he kind of knew what was going on, and this is the part where he's like, I should have gone, and Duncan's like, you got to stop thinking like that, like it's too late, like there's plenty of things I regret that I wish I'd changed, like killing this guy like 100 years ago, but at this point you got to live with the present, like it is what it is. So it's good messaging at the end. And then Maurice is like, whatever happened to the guy? And Duncan's like, oh, don't worry, he's dead. Which wraps up episode 20. And now we're at the finale. Literally, that's the name of the last two episodes. It's part 1 and part 2, another one of these fun things. So, of course, we're going to wrap up the whole Callus bullshit. He's an alright villain, I gotta say. I don't remember his name anymore. I like the Watcher guy. He was kind of like more of a threat, and he was like, I feel like he had more interesting stuff. He had a lot more like bullshit, like being alive stuff going on. He was killed like 3 times, and he's not an immortal. But Callus, I don't know. He just didn't like, I would say, that's the thing. The villains in this show are not bad. They're hit or miss. And these like season-long villains or like arc-along villains like Callus and like the Watcher guy, I don't know. I don't feel it too much. Like some of the like one-and-done villains, like, or even the ones that like pop up here and there, like Xavier, I liked a lot better. Like they're a lot more malicious, a lot more like they just seem like much more of a threat. The whole thing with the Watch guy killing Darius, like that was good. Callus, like getting involved and like hurting people and like kind of the stuff he does. But it's like at some point I'm like, he like sneaks away too many times, if that makes sense. And it's like, it's too much of a focus. Like if he was more like a Xavier where he like popped up here and there and then he was eventually dealt with, like that's more interesting. Speaking of Xavier, the flashback here, okay, so there's a whole issue in this episode, in episode 21, where Duncan is talking to Amanda about her fighting his fights for him. And it leads to a flashback, which was a cool flashback, but it was kind of, it's one of those things where it's like, okay, they had to come up with like some reason why they'd have this awesome flashback, and I don't think they came up with like the best reason, if that makes sense. And it sounds like I'm really harsh on these last 2 episodes, and I'm not. They're pretty decent. They got a lot of like at stakes, and they like modify things and make some good adjustments, and they have like a nice ending and everything. It's just some of the, it just seems like a little lazy. Not a lot lazy. Like if I'm looking at like Highlander as a series and episodes are bouncing between like B's and A's, this finale is definitely more in like the B area, where it's still good and I still enjoy it more than like most shit that's out there. But it's like, I feel like if they could just, like if they spent a little bit more time going back and forth in the writer's room or however this is working, they could come up with something like a tidge better. But the flashback is cool. It's I think his name's Hazamel. He's this Arab guy, immortal, and him and Duncan are just like hanging out, like drinking tea and talking about Islam, or talking about Allah and all that stuff. And that's good stuff. And I can't remember Duncan's there. He like wanders over there at some point. Anyway, our old boy, speaking of Xavier St. Clair, he rolls up and he wants to fight Hazamel. And then Duncan, who I think this is like early on, so maybe like the 17, I would even say probably like the 1600s, like right after he became an immortal and like wandered down here before he's like good at fighting because he went to Japan and Mongolia. I think that seems like when he's here. Excuse me. So he's here, and Xavier shows up, and Xavier wants to fight, and the guy's like, I don't want to fight you. And then Duncan's like, I'll fight you. And then Xavier's like, I don't kill virgins. Badass. And that's my point. Like, I'm like, when he came back, I was like, oh, that guy was probably the best villain of this entire, like, 3 seasons thus far. Like menacing, like does assholery things, like it's just like not like unrepentantly evil, just kind of like a pragmatist when it comes to like I gotta fucking take care of myself. I have like fancy things that I like to do, and also I'm an immortal, so I gotta like do anything I can to win. Like fuck your honor, essentially. Like there's some things he won't do, like fighting holy ground, obviously, but like gassing it up or like shooting people in advance, like he's like YOLO. Okay, so Hazamel's like, hey, let's get out of here. I don't want to fight this guy. Like, there's no point in fighting. Like, he's not one of these immortals who doesn't like to fight. And Duncan's like, well, you're going to be a coward. I'll go fight him. And then he, like, storms off. And so later on, Xavier's, like, waiting at, like, the place that he designated for him and Hazamel to fight. And then Duncan shows up, and he's like, what are you doing here? And he's like, Hazamel's not going to show up. And he's like, I'm not going to fight you. You're like a little baby. And then Duncan's like, oh, yeah, well, then I'll just take your head. And Xavier's like, all right. And then Hazamel does show up because he's looking out for Duncan. He's like, hey, I don't need you to fight my fights for me. Like, I'm wiser than that. Like, you need to listen up. And then Xavier beats him, obviously. And then he, like, bumps into Duncan again. And he, like, makes fun of him and mocks him. And then Duncan, like, wants to fight him. And Xavier's like, go fuck yourself. And, like, takes off. And so that brings us back. Okay, so the episode begins. Callus is in prison, just like gardening or some shit. And then this like psychopath, like literally, he calls him a psychopath, and he's kind of like a deranged killer. At some point, there's like a mini prison riot. I think it's supposed to be like a big prison riot, but this guy like gets a shank and like stabs Callus for like no reason, just because he likes killing people. And then Callus obviously is immortal and is like doesn't die, and so then he like threatens the guy, and he's like, "You're gonna work for me now. You're my little like puppet." And the guy's like, "Okay." And then a bit later, Callus gets like a message, and it's like someone's gonna rescue him, and he's like, "Okay." So he goes and gets like the serial killer guy. And then they go and they get like a key or something. They like kill some guards, and then they get over like a wall, and the person rescuing him is dun 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 Amanda. What? And the reason Amanda's there getting him out is so she can behead him, because she wants to like do a favor for Duncan because she feels bad about something. I don't know. She's tired of him always protecting her or something. I don't know. There's like some bullshit. Anyway, she's fighting Callus and things, or she's trying to fight Callus. I don't think Callus even has a sword. She's just gonna like cut off his head. But then like the serial killer guy comes up and like stabs her in the back, and then they both like run out of there. And then Callus like jumps a guy and gets a suit, and then he gets the serial killer guy to get him like a whole crew of like cronies to go track down like Duncan MacLeod so he can start fucking with him some more. And then meanwhile, Mythos and Joe are like in Paris. And why are they in Paris? They go talk to Duncan, and Duncan doesn't know because he's like, "What are you guys doing here?" And they're like, "YOLO." And I'm like, "Isn't Joe like Duncan's watcher? Shouldn't he be here? Isn't that like the point?" But I guess they got like some watcher business they got to take care of, and that watcher business is this lady. So last time we saw Callus, he killed his watcher, right? And I guess his wife is gonna expose the Watchers and the Immortals to like the whole world through like the news agency or whatever. And then Mythos makes some comment. Mythos is like, "Whatever, let's get out of here." And then Joe's like, "Aren't you worried about that?" And Mythos is like, I like deleted everything that had anything to do with it. Like there's all her records or whatever, or all of the guy's records. There's no way for him to be able to do whatever." But then like she finds a CD with like all the information on there, and so she's like, "Got him." So she goes to talk to the reporter, and he doesn't believe at first, but then like, wait, I'm like mixing the episodes, but okay, no, because I think that's the way. So then Duncan runs into Callus at some point, and they fight, and Callus runs off again like a little bitch. And then Amanda's like she tries to go and like seduce Duncan because she, oopsie doopsie, she's like a fucking Harley Quinn, but like not as crazy. She's like, "Hey baby, I missed you so much. I made cook you some dinner and get you wine." And then they're eating, and then Duncan's like, "What the fuck did you do, Amanda?" And she's like, "Oh, what do you mean? I just want to hang out with my favorite boy in the whole world." And he's like, "Don't fuck with me." And she's like, "Okay, I might have released Callus because I wanted to take his head and help you out." And then Duncan's like, "What the fuck?" And she's like, "Don't be mad, see at me." And he is mad seeing her. And so they get into a fight. They end up like making up over the next couple episodes, and it looks like they're going to be a couple going into season 4 because they're like super like huggy and like kissy and like romantic, right? So I seem to vaguely remember that, so I guess that's when it happens, is that they like spend some decent amount of time like being together, doing fun stuff together, especially now that Richie's gone. Let's see. Oh, at some point Callus is at like the restaurant of Maurice, and Duncan goes to like confront him there, and then the serial killer like holds up Maurice, and then Duncan gives him like, as we know, Duncan is like a billionaire, so he gives Maurice like a bunch of money and is like, "Get out of town for a while, please." And Maurice is like, "Adios," or whatever however you say it in French. And he takes off. Let's see, is there anything else happened in that first episode? Oh yeah, so the episode kind of ends. Oh, okay. So the episode ends because the lady's going to go with the disc and everything to report to the reporter, and then Joe confronts her with a gun because he's going to shoot her because it's like his morality is like less important than like the lives of all the Watchers and like their mission and all the Immortals and everything. And then at the last second, he actually shoots at her. But when I say shoots at her, he like shoots her, but then Duncan like jumps in the way and takes the shot, and then she like skirts out of there, and then Duncan's like, "Joe, like do better." "Do better, Senator." And then Duncan like wanders off, and then Joe's like, "Why did he save her?" And then Mythos is like, "He didn't save her, he saved you." And that's the end of the episode 21. Now the second episode has another like random flashback. This one stars Amanda. It's like 100 years later, and he's back in like Arabia. He's in some sultanate. I don't think Arabia. I don't know. It's supposed to be like the 1700s. I'm trying to like think. Anyway, he's somewhere with sultans, and then Amanda's there as like a dancing girl, but she's actually a thief, and they catch her as a thief, and they want to like cut off her hands and her head or something, and then Duncan like intercedes and like saves her life. Okay, anyway, so him and Amanda in this episode spend a lot of time like making up, and then at some point Callus like tracks down this, I think her name's like Susan or something, the lady who's gonna like, she goes and she like reports in about everything. And then somehow Callus like finds out because one of his guys is like tracking her, or like her overheard a conversation she had with Mythos or something. And so he goes and like kills her and kills like the newspaper reporter who's going to report, and then steals the disc. And then he goes and sets up like a trap where like he has to like check in every day, or like the stuff's going to be sent to like everywhere on the interwebs or whatever. And so he uses that against Duncan in the episode. Well, at some point, Amanda like tracks him down and they fight, but then he like skirts away again, or she loses, and then Duncan shows up to fight, and then he skirts away because Duncan's a much better fighter than Amanda. And they somewhere around here, she's, that's where they're like, "Oh, we're in love." And she's got like longer hair now because she had like really fucking short hair, which is never attractive. Ever, for anybody, under any circumstance. Well, like men, I guess. But I'm not into men, so I don't know. So she has like
shoulder length hair, not even that, like more of a bob kind of situation, and she looks like much more attractive. Anyway, she gets caught by Callus. Okay, so she gets caught by Callus, and then Callus doesn't kill her because he wants to use her as a bargaining chip against Duncan, but then she seduces like his men and escapes, and then they fight, and then Duncan shows up, and then Duncan's about to kill Callus. That's what happens. Duncan's about to kill Callus, but then he tells him about like the trap, and that if he kills Callus, all their information's gonna be released, and the only way he's gonna like delete everything is if Duncan like agrees to let Callus like cut off his head, because he's a much better fighter than Callus. Duncan is. And so Duncan has to go like think about it for a little bit, and Callus allows that. So they separate for a bit. Meanwhile, Mythos and Joe are just kind of like around doing shit. And they talk about the Eiffel Tower, which is good because at some point Amanda and Duncan are just like kind of being in love, and they're like looking at sites, and they're talking about the Eiffel Tower and how it's like the biggest lightning rod in Europe or something. And it is originally like a radio broadcast tower and stuff like that, just some like good historical stuff. And then they like go up there and they talk about like jumping off, and instead they get like on the ledge and they dance around a little bit. It's like a cute little scene. Anyway, so Duncan decides fuck Callus, and so he goes to fight him, and then like Amanda gives him like the the ladies would give him their like guys and fighting in the tournament like a little handkerchief or whatever. It's like a very French Lansing thing. Jousting, that's what they called it, jousting tournament. And so she gives him whatever it's called, like a favor or something. And then like Mythos and Joe were there, and like the three of them just wait. Duncan goes up into the Eiffel Tower, and Callus is like, what are you gonna do? And he's like, fuck you, that's what I'm gonna do. At some point, this might be the episode where Amanda goes in. At some point, like somebody almost finds his like secret hideout, but they don't. Anyway, so then Duncan and Callus fight, and Callus is like, you kill, like right before Duncan's about to cut his head off, he's like, you kill me, and like something, and then Duncan like remembers what he said to Amanda, or Amanda said to him earlier, I can't recall who mentioned it, that they're in the Eiffel Tower, and it's like a giant lightning rod, and the quickening is like lightning, and he's like, I don't think so, because he like puts two and two together, and like Callus's base is like here in the Eiffel Tower, so if he like cuts his head off, he'll like, the whole thing will like shock, and it will like destroy his secret lair or something, right? And so he does, and then that's exactly what happens. So like the computer that's all that shit on it gets like destroyed, and so it's not saved to the cloud or any bullshit like that, so it's like gone forever, which is good. And there's a whole thing with like Mythos and Joe going back and forth about how like there's a reason we don't digitize things, and Mythos is like, well, I was trying to make it easier. Good stuff. But then he comes down, and him and Amanda like smoochies, and the four of them walk off to victory and the end of season 3 of Highlander, which again was an excellent season. With like, again, there's up and down episodes, but even the worst episode is still like a good watch, like a B. It's still better than average. So go ahead. We'll get to season 4 in a couple weeks. Go ahead and like, share, subscribe, comment, and I'll catch you guys later. Bye.